Oh. You're fine, there's no members that are remote, so it doesn't need to be roll call.
But there doesn't need to be a roll call?
No, you don't have any members that are remote.
Okay, well then let's get right started. We're here tonight to talk about the Riverwalk, Park, Boardwalk, and event space design and permitting. Update on status of project and discuss on design parameters, layout, timing, materials and cost considerations. I've said enough. I turn the floor over. Who shall proceed?
Yeah, we'll let Kathy do the driving. So thanks for getting together tonight. I wanted to just sort of recap our site walk and show you what that looks like on paper. We've got Boardwalk stuff to touch on, and then Riverwalk Park. And we're gearing up, and we're going to sit with the Conservation Commission later this month, and just we want to have a conversation with them about the design work going forward and getting ready to move into sort of the active permitting stage. But we wanted to sort of share those assumptions in the direction that we're going with the design at this point.
So there wasn't a meeting before, after our walk, there wasn't a meeting with Concom?
We have not met
No.
yet, but we plan on this month, the 16th.
16.
So we owe them materials this week so that they can, and I don't know if folks care to attend the section, if anyone else wants to come along. We're talking and using a lot of what we're showing you tonight as the platform for that discussion. So probably best just to kind of, some of these are just images of what we've been doing with you, but the early walk in August, which included the Conservation Commission, like that. And we went back to the beginning of November. Everybody got a chance to really get a good look at the mark itself and kind of the characteristics and some of the views. That's the view that one of the ones we're talking about. So it helped for all of us to be out there and think about where the overlook locations might be and so on. And on that walk, we made some adjustments to the alignment. And this is, I think Andrew took this picture. He was out there with the GPS unit working on locating, where the boardwalk was actually going to go. I think we felt like the eastern side was pretty good. People felt pretty comfortable with that. It was the western side that needed more attention. And so coming out of that meeting and that field walk, we ended up shifting where you left the forest further to the east. Previously, I'll give a pointer, or I can show them.
I use
this board too.
Well, it's right here.
Oh, there you go, great. Yeah, so what we did was we shifted it further to the east to kind of come out of that neck. I guess I described it as a little peninsula of vegetation. And then come at kind of a flatter line across, and we extended the southernmost side out just a little bit to have an overlook where those two intersect. A little circle there. Kathy put this drawing together on the day in the field, but it really captures what was done, and then we picked up those coordinates in the GPS unit. And so, you're good. So the way that we ended up kind of translating that approach in terms of the layout and the alignment is that the areas in yellow, we're really looking at sort of a more of a 1-to-1 ratio, height to width. So at this point, we're continuing with the 6-foot wide boardwalk. And in those north-south areas, it gets better sun exposure underneath. So we're maintaining, our proposal anyway is to maintain that height in the areas in yellow. And then transition up in the area in red, we're looking at seeing if we can get that boardwalk a little bit higher. And that's going to allow for more sun underneath the boardwalk. And that's particularly in that kind of, I'm calling it east-west orientation, that kind of crescent facing out. I think what we walked away with that day is that the boardwalk could be higher through that arc. And that would allow a little more sun. It also has the overlook, so it gets wider in some areas, at least at this conceptual level. So when it's wider, it's nicer to be a little bit higher, but more sunlight through.
Eric, before you go, so the yellow will be how high above the marsh? Will it be?
So there's some details here coming up, which you can see on the next,
Okay.
but basically we're saying a 6-foot clearance, but the terrain of the marsh sort of goes up and down a little bit. And I'll say that variation happens within, like between the mean high water and the high tide line, there's about a foot of difference. And we don't really want the boardwalk to do this. So we want to pick a line that's more or less 6 feet. And in some cases, it'll be more than 6 feet clearance because the grade will drop. In other places, it'll be right at 6.
And the red will go up to 7.
And then, yeah, we would, and again, we're looking at the topography a little bit more carefully. It may be slightly different, the clearance, but the idea is to get that proportion to increase for the arc in red, basically. And so there's a small transition on either side that lets you slope up as you're walking along the boardwalk, but there won't be any switchback ramps or anything like that. You'd just be walking along and then it would go up to that. Yeah. And I have a drawing of that in here. We'll show you. You can see it in a minute. But the idea is it's just a gradual transition up.
Okay.
So a question on the posts and stuff, having worked with a lot of marshes. There are gonna be some places that are spongier and a different composition, 2 or 3 feet down and so on and so forth. So assuming all the posts are the same length, do you intend, like when you have those cases, to like put some sort of firmer filling in there so that the tops of the posts will all look even and so on?
Yeah, so there's been some discussion about what's the right pile or this piling system to support the boardwalk. And I think most recently we've been looking at this system, which is a helical anchor. Essentially, it's a giant screw that's screwed into the sand. And we did the borings out there, so we have better understanding of the strata. And I think there's some concern that there'd be a lot of peat in there, which kind of mixes and makes it more challenging to support it. In this instance, it's mostly sand, so it's fairly consistent. So that was relatively good news. And so these would be screwed in by a small lightweight piece of equipment, and then they can get cut off to the exact elevation.
Oh,
And they have I'll call it a saddle. You can see the little clip there, a saddle that holds that, and that's attached either welded or bolted to the top of the piling. I mean, a more traditional approach might be a wooden pile. We've talked a little bit about that, which would be like a truly driven pile. There's some more impacts with that kind of system. This is a more lightweight sort of system, but there's longevity considerations with each. Wood piles have been around forever, and everybody kind of can understand and manage, how long they last for. Helical anchors are a newer technology. They've been around for 25 or 30 years, I'm sure. But because they're steel, they're more susceptible to corrosion. So they do have a lifespan. That's something that we're continuing to look at to see, what needs to be taken into account if you end up with a helical anchor kind of system. But in terms of up and down, whether it's a wooden pile that's cut off or whether it's a steel anchor, helical anchor, they can be cut off exactly at the elevation. So we're looking for a very consistent sort of appearance, I think.
Yep.
Particularly for the transitions and so on to be smooth also from the different heights.
What's the diameter of the,
The helical anchors could be 2 or 3 inches in diameter, and a driven wooden pile, a small size would be 12-inch probably.
now those flathead or Phillips when you screw them?
So, well, it's kind of interesting to think about because from what I've seen is the shaft, you can put different size, like think of it like a giant wood screw, you can put different size plates. So depending on your bearing stability, it's not that they're necessarily going deeper, it's just that the blades of the screw are maybe getting larger, right, to support it. So we didn't draw them in this, but imagine like to be inclined planes to help support each of those anchors. So they're not going down to rock. Rock's way down there. It's more than 50 feet. So it's more than that. So it's really, that's how far we went, and we didn't hit any. So it's really the way these paddles go on the anchors themselves that would provide the stability, down below the surface.
Excellent.
And there are sort of permanent impacts to this kind of improvement, which we'll talk about more, which would be like the footprint of the piling, how big is it? So if we're using a wooden piling, it's going to have a bigger footprint. It has, more durability in some ways, maybe more longevity, but more impacts to the marsh to get out there and drive them. And it's just a bigger footprint of vegetation that's impacted. This is a smaller impact. So, you could have 3 or 4 or 5 pilings potentially in a helical anchor that would fit in the footprint of one wood. So it's just a lighter impact. The construction technique is lighter. As long as we feel like in the end that the steel will give you the life expectancy that you're looking for and the durability is there. This is the system that we've been looking at. Sort of a big preference, I guess.
Fully loaded cost about the same?
I don't know if I can say right now. It's one of those things that, especially in and it's going to be this way for the next couple of years, I think, with supply chain issues, labor challenges. Some of the more conventional systems may be more cost competitive because people are familiar with it, and things like wood pilings are easy to find. If these are sourced from somewhere else, steel prices have been very volatile this year, so it's been very, very difficult to exactly calibrate the pricing, and there's still a variable with labor in terms of availability of workforce. So in general, it's thought that this would be a little bit cheaper because it's just a smaller piece of equipment. It's very lightweight. It's on rubber tracks. It's just easier to handle and maneuver. But I think the final line is to be figured out, you know, and to say as we go into this, staying flexible and making sure that we have options in front of us so we can get the boardwalk constructed. But my feeling is that we'll be able to stay with these, at least at this point, and this will remain the cost effective and still give a good, you know, good life expectancy with the Helical
Excellent.
Anchor.
Thanks.
So this graphic shows just sort of what that would look like with 6 feet clear, keeping in mind the marsh kind of varies a little bit, but we're trying to maintain that from the highest point to the 6 feet clear on the north-south sections. And then you can go ahead to the next one. Yeah. And then on the east-west arc, we're looking at getting more like 7.5 feet clearance through that arc. And then I think we did a little bit of looking at how the transition happens. So, you know, the goal is, again, not switch back to landings, but to just have a gentle transition up between the two. And, you know, ideally, this may happen as it brings you into the overlook areas. So you may come from the lower height and then sort of transition up and you'll wind up at an overlook. This is kind of a generic concept, but it's kind of showing the relationships between the heights that we're working on.
So that vertical shot there, can you go back like 3 or 4 slides to where the houses were? So if I'm standing in my house in the corner up there at the top, and I'm looking out across the marsh where the path is gonna be. Am I visually, what's my sight line if I'm at home on day?
You can see
Am I
it.
6 feet? I'm up 6 feet, I'm looking out. Am I looking over that walkway, or am I looking right at it, or am I looking underneath
Are you
it?
in the front lawn? Are you in the second floor of the house?
I'm not back.
Are you a realtor describing this view or?
No, I'm just trying to
Yeah.
Figure out what you want to see.
some issues here now. By discussing it later on, the guy may come out and say, hey, what about, you had a view here? No, I don't have anything. So I don't know what that is.
No matter, I think that's gonna be the case. To what degree that will be, I don't know. One of the things that we did in our discussion, if you remember, is we moved the whole trail.
No, I know. I'm not trying to argue. I'm asking the questions for all of our information. I don't know the answer. Believe me, I'm with you. I want to see it happen. I just want to know the answer to that. That's all. Is it something that's going to be a real disruptor to that person?
Here's what I would say. It would depend on where that person is within the body of that property.
Yeah.
You know, I'm in real estate and sometimes but we'll say the same thing. There's views and then there's views and then there are partial views.
And peekaboos.
And, you know, so I'm not sure we know the answer unless we could go stand in their yard and actually physically look to get it. And put some kind of a.
The first question to answer, and I don't know what this, and that's, what's the elevation of that house?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if it's, and it's reasonable to guess this, if it's at least 6 feet above the marsh, then you'll be looking down as opposed to looking and having this thing rise up over your view.
And the other thing is, if you look at I'm using it as the south, it's not really the south, but the west of the building, it looks like right where you're, right there. There's some vegetation, you know, to the right of that. And I don't know how high those are. If that's a bunch of trees, then it might
I agree.
have an effect on their view as well. So I don't know.
And Concom frowns on vista pruning.
There aren't trees though, but there is vegetation, because you talked about that there at the site 3 weeks ago.
That's why we moved everything to the east.
Right, when we stood on the path and actually looked across,
Yeah.
you could clearly see the house.
Yeah.
But you could not see the windows because of the vegetation, and this is the winter. I would think it's gonna be a little fuller in the summertime.
Yeah.
Even in the winter, you could see the top of the roof, you could see the second floor of the house, you could barely see the first floor.
Yeah.
And we were at ground level.
Yeah.
Now, the users are gonna be 6 feet up. So they will be visible, the boardwalk is gonna be visible.
Yeah.
The question is your elevation of the house and also where it is in the marsh, because the marsh is going to move a little bit and the 6 feet will be on top of that.
I would think that their view is really gonna be, just looking at what I see there, looking straight out towards Smuggler's Beach versus
Yeah.
anything looking east or west.
Yes.
I mean, which would be, no, Yeah, other than looking east and west, it's
Yeah.
looking more direct, kind of a
Right,
southern.
exactly. The view from the house, I mean, the lovely view from the house is really straight
Yeah,
Right,
east,
just what's
straight,
showing,
straight
just
toward,
like
yeah,
that, yeah.
exactly, right toward,
okay.
Seagull Beach. But it is gonna be visible, Steve.
Yeah, no, no,
Get some
I
special.
agree, I just want to know something.
I think that the decisions you made in the field, on the walk, we pulled
Pulled it back.
east, there's more buffering coming out of the trees. I mean, we're trying to maintain the distance from the salt marsh feature, little pond there. But pulled it away, and it's also in higher vegetation now. So previously it was out in the Spartina, like the grassier areas of the marsh, and now it's a little bit closer to the high tide line, and so it's in a more deciduous kind of vegetation. So it's a little more concealed in its setting, as much as you can be. I mean, it's an open marsh, but some of the decisions you made really, I think, mitigated that and pulled it back
Yep,
on that corner, and that's that little kink on that upper
Okay.
one.
And the building materials too, if we were using more natural building materials, like if we do the wood, ultimately will weather and it will be, rather than like stainless steel or, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about some of the railing choices you have too, maybe less visible, than others, right? Yeah, but that's a good point, that the type of materials may make a difference as to how much you perceive it.
Okay, Kath,
Thank you.
that's the transition. Oh, okay,
Yeah,
we're at that one.
and then similarly, there's a transition on the end, that kind of happens where you're from the marsh and yeah, we kind of took out some trees so you could see this better, but this sort of happens in the forested area is once you get off of past the high tide line, past the marsh, you start to transition back down. So there's a boardwalk that's bringing you back down to grade, and then we were going to build up some of that grade with some boulders and landscape plantings, and then transition to the path on the end. So this was just a little study to kind of represent, and these are the type of things that we would share, like a conservation plan from the how we're handling the transitions between things. So you had asked me some questions about, materials, and I brought some wood samples as well, just to talk about, but pretty much with any boardwalk system, there's going to be challenges with the wood posts and the decking, and just, whether it's checking or splitting. And so the question was sort of, you can try to preserve the decking, choose the most durable material. How do we approach the railings? One system you're familiar with is like a horizontal wood railing, which is what you have at Bass Hole. What you have at Swindler's Beach, I saw as a similar sort of 2x4, 2x6 on the side. It's a relatively cost-effective railing solution. I don't know currently what the town does for maintenance. On the wood, a lot of times it's just the wood gets put up until it's broken and then it's replaced.
We don't know who takes care of that, it's not DPW.
No, the maintenance is somewhat of a moving target. It's natural resources does some work on that at DPW through parks, tries to maintain things, mostly the planks and the boards that get swapped out.
Yeah.
As far as railing maintenance, there's probably very little.
So let me ask, I won't ask why the Bass Hole Boardwalk isn't fixed, but I will ask, who would fix something if it would happen like the Bass Hole Boardwalk?
Well, as I mentioned, it's kind of a shared responsibility, so like at
So somebody
Bass
fixes
Hole,
the rails,
Natural
somebody-
Resources is working on the bigger fix there.
Okay,
And if it was more smaller, like one railing need to be replaced, it just was checked and cracked, parks could do that. But that bigger fix is necessary at Bass Hole, Carl is handling it with a contractor.
Yeah, right. When you're talking about bigger fix, some of the pilings there were kind of
Oh, yeah.
in the framing, so it wasn't just a railing issue at Bass Hole.
right,
It's
so
also
there's
in
other
the
impact,
the structural
there's
system,
quite
right.
other impact that would require.
It's a costly repair that he's working on, yes.
Yeah,
When you
so the
say
same would
we-
apply here typically is that if a railing broke, then somebody from. the
If we can do it in-house, we will.
If it got blown down a little bit, then we gotta call in the
Robert
troops.
Hour, yes, yeah.
Okay. got
When
it.
you say
Thank you.
wood, what do you mean by wood? What are the choices?
So with this, I just brought these samples. This is southern yellow pine. This is a pressure treated lumber, which you're probably familiar with. And that's what you have. I think this is what's at Bass Hole. This is what you have in a lot of cases, as a horizontal member. I can show you. This is, a tropical hardwood. This actually is a mahogany. So this just gives you a feeling, you can kind of feel the weights between the two. It gives you something maybe a little thinner, but it's also going to be maybe a little stronger than a different type of wood material than the southern yellow pine.
So those are the two.
So, or kind of the two families, I guess, or the two directions. So in the case of a horizontal wood rail, you continue with this, which is relatively inexpensive, fairly economical, and it doesn't have a great life, but it's easy to get and it's easy to work with and repair. You could also go to a tropical hardwood of some kind that's going to do a little bit better in terms of durability and life. And it's a little more expensive to get and a little bit more difficult to bring in. If should this be damaged, and there's nothing so you couldn't replace it temporarily with this. Longevity wise, you're probably going to do better with a material like this. But we talked about this really being most handy or most applicable on the cap. So the surfaces that you touch, the top of the rail, would be, and that's what you have at Smuggler's Beach. If you haven't been out there recently, it's weathered in pretty nicely, but the ones that you touch might be these have less splintering. They hold up a little bit stronger. And maybe the lower rails could be the southern yellow.
These are less visible, right?
Yeah, the ones down below. Yeah, so you might have this on the surfaces. You can see, probably one of the biggest differences is if you look at the grain, you can tell the difference
Much tighter.
between the grain. So what you're getting is just because the way this tree grows, it's slower, it's just gonna be tighter and less prone to splintering and damage.
And that is what is currently at Smugglers?
Yeah, from what I can tell, I didn't go back and look at the construction drawings, but just inspecting, it's a tropical hardwood. I believe it's an eBay that's out there. How low is Smuggler's Bill? On the walk out to
The
the,
fish pier.
yeah, to the
Oh, I'm
pier.
afraid I don't fish.
It might be a state. Wait, was it a state project or a town?
I think it was a state, it was a state, no. Yeah, because I think part of it has to do with the whole, what we can charge for the ramp. Well, maybe the ramp was done separate than the.
The
I think
ramp,
it's-
maybe, yeah.
I think
Around
it's
my-
a town project, but maybe state funded through.
It's a quality project, it's a good experience to go out. It's 6 feet wide to walk out to the fishing pier itself. It's using 2x6 for the cap, so a little bit bigger than this lumber. And then 2x6 for the decking. So it's certainly well made with a big commitment to quality,
Yes.
Yes, out on the pier itself, the walkway approach is like this, it's like wood horizontally with this cap, and then the walkway or the railing around the pier is metal with a metal top rail. But it's close, yeah, it's close, and it's good to look, it's good to see kind of the materials and see how they've held up out there.
Have you had any maintenance issues out there?
No, but I think Carl did a project out there not too many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, with working on some of the railings. So that might be fairly new, even though the structure itself is a little bit older.
Talk about getting beat to the weather. If anything, that's gonna take a bigger beating than we'll live over.
Really exposed there, sure.
And that was done in-house, that work that was done?
No, that would have been the contract.
Jackson?
Yeah.
So we shall probably take a walk out and go see Smugglers.
So when you say a contractor, Jeff, just want to, for the maintenance aspect of things, is that something that's budgeted or so you got a project that's out there, like this one, Smugglers, that needed some work. Did you budget for that or how did you?
It probably would have, it's a little bit before my time, but that probably would have been a capital request that Carl would have made. It would have gone through our capital budget committee, which they review anything over $10,000. And so that was probably, budgeted 6 years ago, maybe something like that.
And this repair may be something that's covered under insurances of some sort that would bring in additional.
We're hoping it is, yeah.
So I started to say-
I don't know.
We can talk about that a little bit. It's pretty hard to get into the finer grain, but I can tell you what we've learned so far, how to think of it. Yeah.
Because I think,
Yes.
Rich got that, yes.
Yes.
3 weeks ago.
He did, right. It's a good point.
So I started to say, I know we've discussed it before, but I just want to bring it up again. When we start looking at cost estimates and so on, we'll want to look at the balance in longevity versus cost. In other words, if something lasts 50% longer, but it costs twice as much, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Or a good
Life
thing.
cycle cost.
Right,
Yeah, some information.
It's a thing, but we
Right.
want to look at it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this is fairly nuanced in some ways because you're dealing with, like the posts and the posts could be southern yellow pine or they could be a different material. And so there's a certain longevity, in the decisions that are made. I think the key, what you hear tonight is me sort of saying we need flexibility because of the supply chain issues and availability of materials. And I'd like to talk with the Conservation Commission about in design intent, but also trying to maintain flexibility for costing reasons and things like that. as well as just, is the material available? So we're talking about something that's gonna be 2 years out.
Right.
Can we even get it?
The president said last week there aren't any supply chain issues, so, not sure we need to concern.
Yeah.
I'm just quoting.
It's a challenging conversation, but it's one, it's important to talk about it now and not be
Not a
surprised.
statement, not an opinion, it's a quote.
We'll find out, won't we? Okay, so let's stick to the discussion here. So this is some discussions on this plate is the pluses and minuses of the material for, so the wood post checking and splitting. Railing, this is also using the PVC, I mean,
This would be, this is all kind of assuming that whichever wood you have here, versus a cable railing, so we'll talk about the cable system as
Right.
well. But I think any of these considerations are ones that if you have a horizontal rail, checking and splitting over time, the screws will crack, they'll drop, you'll lose them. What the maintenance replacement is currently, maybe there's not even a program, it's just if something happens out there, you go out and replace it. Sometimes this is treated with a preservative, to help it get a little bit longer life. Most of these woods don't require preservative, so southern yellow pine would do better if it were preserved.
What is the lifespan of this general?
It could be 50, could
Right,
be
but that just says, it says wood, so I
Oh,
wasn't sure.
So,
what
right,
was.
yeah, so usually with this type, it would be a 10 to 15 years, so southern yellow pine would be 10 to 15, because of the grain, it really starts to dry out and check.
Yeah, please.
These guys, Ipe 50 years, they're saying if it's treated,
absolutely.
if it's treated more, I brought this one, this is from my own yard, I don't know if that counts for a good example, but this is Ipe. So this is a piece of deck that, you can see what it weathered naturally. So it wasn't treated, the ends were waxed to keep it from checking, but, it gives you an idea of it gets kind of silvery gray. And you'll see if you go down to Smugglers, you'll see.
See, that's the
What
kind
else
of
is
thing, from a distance, someone looking at that, it will blend into the marshes beautifully.
Without a lot of maintenance or extra care, right? And
Which is why we have railings, so that
visual.
people don't-
Absolutely. And how old is this piece of wood that,
this is probably about 15 years,
That's
10
nice.
to
And look at
15.
us, it's still very tight.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a completely different sort of growth pattern.
what are the other two items you have over there?
This is a piece of southern yellow pine.
Okay,
Yeah, decking, so this just shows you, this is the same, this is a 1x6, this is a 5/4 by 6.
She's checking.
This is a couple years old only, yeah, this was in a sandy location. And then this was a heavier, this is just a shred, but this is a closer, the same thickness. A lot of times it's called a 5/4, which ends up being, pretty close to 1 inch thick. And we may be looking at even a greater thickness for more, for more durability. We'll be looking at it more closely. Smugglers has a 2x6, which is a full dimensional. It's this thick, very heavy duty. So there's pluses and minuses. Maybe the material may wear a little better. It's going to be more expensive at a full 2-inch dimension. It's heavier on the pilings, and so there may be reasons to kind of keep it light and look in this, 5/4 sort of range.
I think Mark was also saying how you install that's different than between the two.
Yeah, so this requires, pre-drilling with hardened carbide tipped equipment and countersinking, which means, cuts a little hole for the screws to set you for. It's like a lot of maybe bolt work.
Intensive.
Yes and no. I think this is just sort of, you can just put the screw in it and the screw goes right through. This typically, there's a little more layout involved. I also mentioned like the ends of this wood gets waxed and sealed. Yeah, and so that helps limit the amount of checking. So every cut, gets sealed. And again, it's a little more upfront, but in terms of longevity, you're dealing with it completely. And for this system, like if we're saying 6 feet wide, they would buy probably 2x6x12s. They'd cut them in half and they just seal the, they just do a production run at the factory or in the lumber yard of it. So try to limit the field cutting, The pre-drilling might be possible too. It just depends. The frame sometimes varies a little bit because of the piles and where they fall. So sometimes it's safer to drill it in the field because the holes might not be exactly right. So usually you have a crew going through and drilling and laying out, and then you have a second crew just coming in,
Like building a railroad.
Yeah, I mean, but Mark's right. I mean, it's just different equipment and a little more process to the different materials.
The southern yellow pine preserved in any way?
This is pressure treated, so yeah.
What's the view of pressure treated over?
They don't have such a problem with pressure treated over the marsh, they just don't like it in the ground
Okay.
anymore.
So I remember.
And there
that.
is still leaching of
The
it.
salts and, yeah.
Yeah, it's pressure treated with like what, zinc or something?
Yeah, there's a couple different techniques. The chromated copper, I think, is sort of less used today, sort of in marine environments. So let's spend a little bit more time looking at, if this were to be an option, what the right preservative treatment is. But if it's a steel pile going in, it's not in contact with the soil. And then obviously there's less leaching happening with the denser, natural product. In this case, this is untreated. But those are the kind of, and again, I just wanted to kind of compare a wood system, but the posts can check and split, the rails, same thing, challenges there with the fasteners coming out. Wood, you should be maintaining the wood, especially if you're using the Southern yellow pine. This product might have a 10-year, 15-year lifespan. And then it's impacted by storm events, mechanical stresses, people climbing up and down it or pulling it or trying to burn it. This doesn't float, this doesn't burn.
That's good.
Which is very
That's a real
different than,
plus.
we saw a lot of Southern yellow pine up in the rack line, pieces of this floats and this burn. And I don't know how much of a concern that is for you, but some clients are concerned about the vandalism aspects of
I would
it.
not like to see the boardwalk float over to the Smuggler's Beach.
A big fire on it either.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
you
the
don't want
fire-
to
Find
find
fire, a Viking funeral,
We've, so, again, some of them have just inherent characteristics that are a little bit more durable, long term, but they're more costly in many ways. And then the next slide was just, kind of the same discussion for cable rail. If you have a cable rail, you still have a wooden post of some kind, so you still have the same concerns about your posts could check or split. This is when we talked, Susan, we talked a little bit about how to do this, and the cables have to be correctly tensioned. And so, getting that right at the beginning is important. And then, if they're not maintained at the right tautness, they can get sort of manipulated and they can get looser, which is not great. But once they're established at the correct tension, they can last for quite a long time and be pretty durable. So that may be it. Kathy was asking me, is it a yearly thing? It kind of depends on how they're treated out there, but maybe you'd say, once or twice a year, you'd go out and check them and see if you've got, and you probably have first-hand experience. Right. And so, once they're set and dialed in, and what you can see in those drawings, you see the posts, and then between them is a small strut, and that strut has holes drilled in it, and so the cables go through and they help keep them from being, so you can't stretch them.
Right.
So again, it's like a fence, keeping it taut is really important, and that's gonna last a lot longer if it's maintained, like that. We were talking a little bit, the cable rail, there are some products that they say, they recommend treating the rail or the cable itself with, and this is like a marine or an aircraft grade, protectant that could be wiped onto the cables, whether that's realistic or not over a 1,400-foot boardwalk, times 9 or however many cables there are, that's a lot of cables to treat. But there are treatments to help preserve the cables.
From salt.
Yeah, I mean, the cables are, well, assumably, if that was the decision, it would be 316 or so stainless steel, so it would be a stainless steel, but that doesn't mean it doesn't rust or corrode. And the voids in between the cables, there will be, risk of corrosion there.
What's the lifespan of the cable?
I don't know if I could say yet. Yeah, I don't know if I could say yet. I think it's certainly more than like a horizontal rail in a traditional wood, maybe in a tropical wood, you might do a little bit better on the horizontal rail. And I think we have a couple of slides talking about just ways of thinking about the lifespan cost. And the cable rail system is the more expensive system by far. A lot of the cable rail manufacturers, and we've had some conversations with them, they sort of advocate that, yes, it's more upfront, but it's the better life. Right, it's the longer life product.
There wouldn't be a 1,400-foot straight run and break it into pieces, so for piece have.
Right, you can't tension it tight enough, so we kind of, Kathy and I have been working on this, we're gonna work on these modules and might gang, this is a 15-foot module, you might say 30 feet or 45 feet, and then you have a set of these tensioners, and then you do it again, so.
Exactly, yeah.
So if you have failure or damage to one, it doesn't affect the whole perimeter, it's just a section that could be.
Just tighten it again.
That's right. And, if you were dealing with replacement of a piece, depending on how it's attached to it could either go through the posts or it could be attached to the face of the post. There are a couple options there, but you wouldn't be dealing with a 3,000 foot spool of wire.
Right.
You'd be dealing with a 50 foot length or 30 foot length you take out there. And believe it or not, a lot of these manufacturers make a standard length. So you could, as far as maintenance goes, you could buy this repair length, right? So just if the tensioner is something's wrong with it, you just take the whole thing and just bring out a new one in the field. And custom areas like the overlook are going to be a little bit different thing, but if we can design it in a standardized fashion, the maintenance could be approached sort of the same way.
And I don't mean to get in the weeds, but two quick questions. One, would it be worth it at all to consider having those cables encased in plastic?
I've seen that done before. Yeah, I think there's sometimes a UV challenge or durability challenge in terms
That's the
of,
breakdown.
Yeah. and then you lose
Over
that
the
plastic.
mark,
Not immediately, but there may be better solutions out there than the ones we've seen that haven't worked as well. So
And I
that will be
assume-
something.
Okay, and I assume they have cables now that resist fraying.
Yes.
If somebody goes out there with their knife and starts playing with it or something.
Yeah, it depends on the number of cables wound into the bundle. So we had made some assumptions and this is saying a 1/4 inch diameter, but you could get slightly larger, which might be a little bit more durable. In terms of, if somebody wants to go out there and really cut away on them, just like with wood, it's hard to say you can protect against all those occurrences.
So we can have physical cables, a bundle of 3 is harder. broken.
Yes, that's right, wound, how they're wound together. But a lot of the similar components that the rails, the posts themselves are sort of maybe something we need to talk about. The handrails might be the same material at the top, and then you'd be selecting a cable system in between. The other thing with this is it lets you see more, maybe it's more, friendly in terms of views, in and out, like people looking at it are gonna see less. It's also gonna cast a little less shadow, to the degree that there's shadow from the railings, but there is at this height. So the cabling would not cast much shadow at all.
So let me ask, so if we were to go the other direction with the wood horizontal planks, how far apart would they be?
Yeah, so,
So if you go back to, the previous picture.
Ray, so right now we're working with,
I'm sorry.
we're working with building code, which Bass Hole is a little bit different, it's older and it wasn't really set up the right way, right? So we're also looking at kind of clearance requirements, but generally speaking, we're trying to keep it so you can't pass a 4-inch sphere is the requirement. So these are, the gap between them is, 7 or 3 and 7/8, something like that, or 3.5 inches. So it's basically every time you have one of these, you have a gap that's about the same width, and then you have another one. And that's what we're showing and estimating right now. I mean, maybe through the process of the design, there might be some flexibility encountered, but I'd rather be conservative and say sort of this is what the code says.
So aesthetically, if we're going back to the particular home that we've talked about, this view, they're pretty much gonna see a wooden wall.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's gonna be hard to detect 3.5 inches. I think the further you away, you'll lose that in your view.
Right, but don't forget, they're quite a way away, they're at least a
Right.
football
But
field.
aesthetically with the wire, you're not gonna see anything but rail.
You're right, you'd see the top railing and the
Right.
base, right, because the wires will fade off.
Yeah,
Right. The issue with the wires though is the maintenance. It is,
and we're gonna have maintenance. I think it's cost more than anything, cost versus maintenance,
right,
because have maintenance on wood as well.
right, but the wires, I think the wires, my experience with the wires is I love the way they look, and I think it looks great. But every summer I have summer problem child because the kids put their feet on them. Little kids walk along and they hang on to them instead of putting their hand on the top of the rail. They hang on the wire. I know, we should have went for the wires. We're stopping from doing it.
Yeah, not in my house. My
But,
grandkids get
but the
doing it.
view is, it's for air and sunshine, you can't beat it. It's practically, it's practically non-existent.
Yeah,
But it's a pain in the neck to make sure they're tight and to try to educate people not to touch them, especially at the overlook area where people are gonna be sitting on a bench. Kids naturally put their feet up and they put them right on those railings.
Yeah.
So I love the railings, but I'm just nervous about.
Yeah, so we add to the tree job description and wire tightener.
Because if we make
Because
how many trees does he have?
Why don't we hire this?
Except for the dead bodies.
Well, I like that look too, but I think you're right, it's way more visual, I mean, it's easier to see, and it's more out there to see.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But I like that look too, and I think the maintenance on that would be
It's gonna be,
negligible,
it's gonna be much.
but I mean, I like the wires too, I don't know.
All right, Eric, move forward.
That's the thing that we bring up.
Kathy.
So I guess what, again, we're kind of going back to the discussion on maintaining flexibility, this at this point, I mean, maybe there's a solution where, perhaps this is cut down and made to be a little bit thinner in profile, so, maybe it's ripped down and you're not seeing quite as much lumber. Maybe there's a system that alternated this and then a cable and then a solid piece, if you wanted to have like a hybrid, where you had sort of less wood and introduced, so you weren't fully reliant on one over the other. I mean, we haven't looked at that in any detail, but with this model, this is a 3D model. This is just a still scene from that model, but we could show you what some of those ideas look like. I think, again, just globally, this is probably the most conservative sort of approach. It's a wood rail horizontally. Maybe there are areas that could be cable, like maybe the elevated areas, cable, and the sides, the north-south sides. But if we kind of go in and say, this is the reality of budget, the reality of sort of repairs, we'd like to investigate more cable as a solution, but we're just not sure we can do both. Maybe a composite approach is practical. We can look at, this one just shows some of the components, just so you can kind of see. On the next one, just shows you. The cable rail we went through, and same things with storms. These are some ideas of usually the bundle of cables, how the cable's put together, and you can see the tensioner at the end, which you're familiar with, and so on. And attach to the post. And you're right, you don't do the whole perimeter, you're gonna do them in modules of 30 or 50 feet, something like that. We can go on to the next one. I wanted to show this. This is a example of a mesh railing I came across, and I know we kind of focused either on wood or on cable. This is, I think, a fairly nice installation. It has a metal top rail and then a channel underneath. And then this is a crimped wire mesh. And it's to me, it's very clean looking. There's a southern yellow pine post with caps on the top to protect them from splintering and checking. And then you can see the panels are screwed into the sides.
That's great. What's the mesh made of?
This is, I believe this is a stainless. Oh yeah, this one looks like aluminum. We've seen a couple that are stainless as well. So you can get the mesh in a lot of different products.
And can it be treated with that marine preservative?
It could be, yeah. I mean, I think stainless would be your best, but it would also become, be fairly shiny. This looks like aluminum to me.
My concern on that goes back to your comment about kids climbing on it. I think that invites climbing.
Well, it's kind of hard because the squares are only this
Squares are very
big.
small.
You're not gonna get your foot in it.
Yeah, you
Is it
do.
squares? 2 inches or something?
Yeah, that's what they look
I
like.
was thinking it was more like 4.
Well,
Yeah, it will be under
It's not-
4, but 3 would be like the max, I would say, because you don't want to get your toes into
yeah, they're
it.
probably about that big.
Yeah, kid size, yeah.
Well,
And the
Whatever, just a
railing,
thought.
the railing is metal?
Correct. So what you see on the right hand side is
Easier.
it's welded to the channel. I think, I'm not sure who did this. This was a state park project with a fishing pier and for like ferries to come up to.
Right.
I think it's a very nice system. It's fairly clean looking to me. We talked a little bit about, whether you need to have a frame all the way around them.
Right.
You can see they did the frame very lightly. It's just that small channel. And they have a very nice fastener. I think, I find this to be unacceptable. And you may find that this price is kind of in between wood and cable. It may be in the middle. I think the downside is it's a little more visible, right? No matter what, you see more of it. And there's more surfaces to have issues with. So the cable rail is very light and it has less points of contact. Every one of these crimps or welds, over time becomes an area that's challenged by corrosion. So, you might have accelerated corrosion issues with the kind of mesh system. If it's metal, we also talked about there are some fiberglass or composite products available that you could do in a mesh.
Looks like repair and replacement would be pretty simple.
exactly, yeah.
Just take that panel out.
Six screws and you're done.
I think there are little saddles underneath the bottom rail, that hold it and carry it in place. And
Take one out, put a new one in.
And the metal top rail, any problem with heating or being too warm in the summer?
It's a good question. I don't think so.
Not really.
Well, I tell you, if the 9/11 memorial in New York City, that was a weird issue.
Was it?
Yes.
Solar
I mean,
power.
reflective,
Yeah.
they have
okay.
metal rails and they
I was thinking
finally,
like mass.
well, you know what they did? They finally solved the problem. In the wintertime, they have an electric current that runs through it that melts snow and keeps it relatively warm. And in the summertime, they have water that goes through it. The feeling being that anytime anyone came to the pool to visit, or, or they could reach out and touch the railing and that's how they solved the problem. That was they wanted people to be able to, and that's how they solved it. So because the feeling was in the summertime, it would get too warm for people to touch it, so.
No, the real truth is it was gonna get so cold in the winter, they were afraid that everybody's gonna stick their tongue on it, and then they would have all these people stuck to the railing all over the place.
But,
I like this though.
yeah, they have.
We can overcome the issues with
Just
it.
like, sometimes I like it, they come to make that as to melt.
Right, to melt.
Same idea, so
Sure.
there's no snow.
Sure.
It stays.
Would complain about all the calls.
I'm not necessarily opposed to
Yeah,
this.
me either.
Neither am I like the look of it.
More than think about it.
I mean, maintenance wise, like I said, one's panel in, one panel out.
Yeah.
Then take the panel back to the shop and fix it.
Yeah,
And then it's
keep it supply. I like the look of that too. It's very capey looking.
Yeah.
It's very marine. I mean, I think that maybe in certain settings, it might, like an overlook setting or something like that, where you're worried about, more feet being on it and things like that. Or this may be.
We have mechanics that go well, yes.
next.
You would have someone who could repair this?
No, we probably, most of these systems, I would say we probably, contract out.
Yeah.
We don't have enough people to do what we do now.
That's my biggest
Just a
thing.
little mesh.
That's my biggest.
Yeah, like with these,
Just what I said, my biggest-
you'd have some attic stock, if you had space to store it, the project might make 10 extra panels.
Yes.
And that you could keep, and the same with the cables, if it's a 30-foot length, the attic stock of cable, but you still need the people to go out and take it apart and.
Yeah, we're gonna have a storage space at the bathrooms, right?
Yeah, they could be stored there. And the minute you take one of these panels out, the posts do this, I'm sure, so there's kind of this, making, maintaining and putting back together does require, a little bit of carpentry skill.
Okay, good point.
Next,
That's a good point. You get it.
So we wanted to kind of put these in and we'll share this, that the idea that the overlooks might get 18 inches or 2 feet wider. And our idea was to kind of do these where the walk bends, we've already looked at those, but where the boardwalk comes in at an angle is sort of, we're trying to standardize as much as we can, and then where they come together, that would be the piece that's a little more customized.
So we talk a little bit about a bench in some of these locations.
Yeah, I can't remember if I left this in or not. If the next one, does it show a seating area? No, we were looking at whether there should be a seating area as part of, we can talk about it in this view, whether there should be a seating area as part of the overlook. And then someone I think said, will people be looking at the overlook and I'll be staring at people? Our benches may be better served just on a straight run, near the overlook.
That's right,
Yeah, so you have like kind of a chance to come out to the edge and look over. We talked about interpretive panels along that section.
Yep.
But not seating behind. And then once you kind of turn the corner, that the bench might be just beyond.
Yep.
But the same thing is the bench would have a little bit more width.
the motivation was that the bench would be where her pointer
Yeah,
is.
just put little ones at the end, if they
Like-
weren't, just so that if somebody's really tired, or it's an older person and they need to sit down, they have a place to rest.
Like a chair instead of a bench.
Almost,
So
yeah, well, bench chair.
So that looks like it's about 12 feet, if you're assuming each one is 4 feet. You could put two short benches
That's
there
one.
that give people a place to sit and still people can stand. So I think you can
Exactly.
put smaller benches in a whole.
Yeah.
So I think a bench at each makes perfect sense.
That's a good idea.
How much width do you need between the edge of the bench and the railing?
Yeah, so a bench is usually about 18 inches wide, like think about the chair that you're
So
sitting.
from the center of the walkway to that outside rail, how far?
Yeah, we were doing about 18 inches of,
Okay.
to 2 feet of
Okay.
extension there.
Okay,
It's not enough room for a bench and not that.
Well, if it was gonna be a bench, you'd wanna be, because your knees end up sort of,
you don't want to leave on,
into
yeah.
the travel space, so you'd go deeper. This isn't a bench in this, so this is just what's the depth of it.
I'm assuming most people want to look at the view.
Yeah, and then if the
Yeah, they
bench,
won't be looking back, they'll be looking.
the bench might be on this side, And maybe you have a bench on either side, depending on,
I
where
was just
you are.
envisioning, if it came out, you have just a little bench there, and a little bench there, so people can sit,
Mhm.
and then it's just a little one there,
Each side,
exactly.
yeah, so that guy could be. would be
Open,
pretty
so people can
small.
stand there, so it's really,
Yeah,
there's some room for
keep this
people to
open.
stand right there, and then there's some room for people to sit.
And
Sure,
then we're relying on parents to not let their kids.
That's
on the
true.
bench and just so really-
Well, they have
Like
that
they had
at
two
Status
separate
Quo,
benches.
that's the way it is at Status
Yeah,
Quo.
you can walk around. not
You're
against
right.
walls.
You're right, though, I mean,
So the people would be looking at each other as opposed to a bench this way looking
Yes, I don't like that. I
But
think
you're-
there's two straight benches
at.
looking out.
As opposed to on either end.
Yeah, just in the middle, separated by a space that they can walk to right up to the.
Well, it could be all three.
yeah, if you're gonna be
Yeah, free
able
benches.
to, right, if you're gonna walk around the bench, it does get,
Tight.
it gets substantially wider, right? To be able to walk around the bench itself, say, and then kind of come back. And I
Well, it
realize
would have
it's not
definitely-
fair, I'm kind of drawing on this, but, you need your passageway of the bench itself, and then you need probably about 3 feet in front of it for the clearance.
So
And
what?
plus the bench, so you're talking about,
Yeah.
you're talking about 5. You're probably talking about 5 feet, with the 6 foot here to be able to fit all this in.
And I hope.
I'm
we
sorry,
get a
what's
lot of
just kind of
visitors.
what we're talking about is if you had a bench and then a space to walk in front of it.
I hope we get a lot of
People's
visitors,
heads
but I'm
turn,
doubting
too.
we'll have gridlock on the boardwalk. I mean,
I can't imagine it myself. But, well, no, during, if there's an event going on and it's sunset, everybody's gonna want to walk out to the boardwalk to watch the sunset and then go back to the event. But yeah, you might have gridlock. Get a cop.
We would,
Traffic
yeah, the
direction.
3 feet is wheelchair compliance. You'd be able to,
Okay.
or if you had a friend that
Oh,
was in a
yeah.
wheelchair, you'd be able to sit next to the bench. And I think it's nice to be able to accommodate the wheelchair,
Oh, yeah, I can bring that too.
next to the bench itself. Well, you can have like a different viewing station, but I think if we put it all together,
Yeah.
and for the events, we may have to have a sobriety checkpoint at the entrance to the boardwalk, though, just for liability reasons.
I'm curious, I don't think that's something that's gonna be all that palatable for the Concom, because you're getting now into like 11 feet wide, and you're not even 1-to-1, even close to 1-to-1 anymore.
The only way you know is if you show it to them and let them tell you what they think.
Yeah, I think just so you understand, one of the things that does happen when you get wider is we get into additional piles that support
Right.
that. I think we can do 18 inches with a cantilever kind of design. Be much beyond that, the structural guys are gonna tell me they want to put in, there's sort of reality of how far can we go with the framing. And so, I think it would add a couple more anchors, or piles to be able to
So if
support.
you just
that.
did the 18 inches, how about just running a bench right across the rail? I mean, you sit down, you look in the other direction, but there's a bench there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you
I
get.
mean, it's 1,400 feet. I think there should be a couple places people can sit down.
Yeah, no, it's important. I guess the question is, as a group, do you see the benches being important at the overlook? So could they be along the way, just before the overlook, say? So the overlook is more of a stand at the rail and kind of look beyond.
So the picture taking.
Yeah, right. That's a good way of
Just
saying it.
just have the
Yeah.
benches along the
Yeah.
railway.
Just throw benches in here and there along the way.
I think that might be, and then maybe it's kind of a little more integrated and kind of keeping our width down.
Mhm.
And you're not having kind of conflicting, because I think this is a quick look, like you said, photos, people gathering. It's gonna be spectacular. We were there. It was a spectacular
The
sunset.
sunset was gorgeous.
Interpretive panels, and then we notch in the benches along the
And then
way.
there's always the people who
Would it
sit on the
be-
bench and monopolize them, and then people will complain, I couldn't sit on the bench.
The boardwalk at those locations, or would you just be putting a bench in and then narrowing a section of the walkway when people walk by?
I think we'd be going outboard of the 6 feet.
So you're having more, in a sense, overlooks. I think the may have some concern.
Yeah, probably.
So we'll talk about that, I think one of the things that's happening here with the grade is as we're getting closer to the lower marsh areas, is the grade is dropping, so it's not 3 here, it's more like elevation 2, so we're maintaining a constant elevation, we're actually gaining a little bit of clearance in some of these areas, so we can look at that more specifically. We're not gonna have 11 feet of clearance, but, we're gonna gain a little bit of height as it drops off from 3 down to 2. So we may be seeing, a little more sunlight particularly in this east-west band. I guess what what I want to know is the benches are important, and so we want to go ahead and continue to have a discussion.
Yeah, I think the location dimensions.
I think so, given this length, and with each bench location potentially be a sponsorship location too, in terms of.
Board of Selectmen get a,
Yeah, I mean, I know you talked about planks, but I think
Yeah.
overlooks could be and bench locations could be to help, you know, for funding.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe there's a way that we can do a different material, like the bench itself need not be wood, right? It could be mesh, or it could be something that is gonna let more sun through that you're not walking on it. So, you know, maybe there's a way to do it in a way that's gonna let and not have as much shading on the surface below.
How high is the railing?
It'll be 42 high, yeah.
But yeah, I was just thinking with regard to the materials you use as well, like with little kids. It's very hard for them to see through it, so
yeah.
they're gonna be wanting to climb on something. Their parents will be probably happy for them to climb on something so that they can see over the railing. So I mean, I think that's a good benefit to using the cable because kids will be able to see through it.
Good point,
But-
good point.
Certainly being mindful that they will be wanting to climb on the benches, I'm sure.
I think the concept of maybe having the hybrid where we put the wood coming kind of the north-south ones, but as we get up and we have the overlooks, maybe at least all the southern side could be the
Okay, well,
cable,
Cable.
and maybe even the northern side of the southern tip is wood.
Yep.
Maybe that's a nice kind of get at as much benefits, but without all the costs.
Yep.
I think we can kind of talk.
Yeah, I don't have a drawing of that, but we'll put one together that looks at, right, could the south side be that? Yeah.
Because ultimately, I think what we want to get out of this meeting is what are the questions that the Concom wants us to provide them with a proposal that they can comment on. So what is the proposal that we would be commenting on? I think Eric did a good job with the minimum 6 foot and then going up to the 7.5 and showing some of the overlooks with the size and stuff, but are we gonna say, the most conservative thing to go with would be the wood railings? We may ultimately want to be able to do the cable, but do we want to say wood now and say we might be looking at cable, but right now we're looking at wood? Or do you want to say this proposal of having some cable? I think the fallback might be the wood, and we don't want Concom necessarily thinking we're gonna do cable if we ultimately find we can't afford to do cable.
well, I mean, and that's part of the answer to that, if asked by the Conservation Commission, is frankly, cost is gonna dictate a lot of that. Do you have an objection to one versus the other? You know, our preference is this, but, you know, as Eric has explained, supply chain, et cetera, this is our preference, and if you don't have any issue with that, that's what I'd like to go with, but if not, are you okay with this?
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's gonna be
I
the
agree.
approach.
Throw everything at them, you know, but for the cost, this is what we like to have.
This is our preference, but, you know, and if you object to that, and
Yeah, I could see some response along the lines of the cables are seen as being somewhat of a mitigation to the width height issue because it does reduce the amount of shading, so they could have a preference based on that rather than. Right.
And could we state our preference as a combination of wood in some areas and.
Yeah.
You could state whatever you guys agree to as a group that you'd like to do.
right, and they're gonna dictate a lot. Once we start giving them stuff, they're gonna start saying, well, we prefer this or that. And we really gotta just listen to them.
Mhm.
I think we need to come up with a reasonable proposal.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
I like
kind
the
of shows we're
hybrid.
trying to mitigate some of these things.
I like the hybrid. I think we all like the
Okay.
hybrid,
Is that
You guys
kind of the
agree?
general?
right?
So it's cable kind of on the
On the red line,
sections that's going east, west.
cable on the red line, wood on the yellow line.
On the view shed areas and then.
That's nice and simple.
Yeah, well, I think, look at that real quick.
Yeah.
There you go, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So cable on red and then everything else.
We'll do wood.
And then as far as wood, are we mahogany? Are we Brazilian Ipa? What are we?
Can we continue, let's continue that discussion as we talk about, it's just, 'cause at this point, I think for them, it's a shadowing discussion and it's probably most conservative, something like this, you know, maybe it could be a thinner you know, if it was a hardwood. But I think if you start to do those horizontal rails and hardwood, you get pretty close to the cable cost really,
Yeah.
really quickly.
Right, but the long-term maintenance cost with the hardwood is
Could be
significantly better.
Could be a little bit different. Yeah, I think that there's a couple of challenges with the way that the woods are attached to the post. And as you get into hardwood, it's more drilling and it's more
Mhm.
bolting and less screws. So
Right.
this is pretty cost effective to attach to, because you can angle the screw in and get it secure. The hardwood, there's a lot more sort of restrictions as to how it's attached. So that adds cost too. When Kathy and I were talking too, we didn't know if there might be a solution that's a horizontal rail and then a cable and then a horizontal. There's almost like a hybrid system, which would allow for a lot of the visibility you're talking about for smaller people to see through it. I don't know if I've ever really kind of thought about what that would look like, but you know, that maybe would be a consideration as well. We would have horizontal rails and wood, and then you could have cable as an alternate.
It's not-
So it might look very light overall and be generally sort of open in appearance because the spacing would be greater. Then we could probably put something together, you know, quickly that you could circulate just as a follow-up to this meeting.
When I was thinking hybrid, I was thinking more of what we have been talking about.
North, south.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Right,
Versus
this whole
trying to
section.
intermix, but, you know, Kelly's point is well taken too, that, you know, maybe there is the peekaboo view and the 4 inches starts at the railing, so maybe most kids can see something.
Yeah, we end up with about 8 inches of clearance then with one cable through the middle, so the out could be.
I just see intertwining them seems complicated.
Yeah, me
that's all.
too.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you use the horizontal rail, it becomes like a stiffener. And so one of the things with the cable rail is it wants to pull the posts, you know, as you tighten it. So you'd have integral stiffeners because of the horizontal rail, so it sort of makes it work well, potentially. But I think the terminations and, you know, is the cable on the same plane as the plank or back from it? Those are the things, the details that have to get looked at. You know, some systems allow you to attach the cable to the face of the post. Others, you can go right through the post. Yeah, so it's just different pluses and minuses to where the placement of the cable is. I think for Conservation Commission, like Kelly said, you know, telling them what you'd like to be doing and then maybe getting some feedback on cable is kind of the lightest impact visually in terms of shading, you know, maybe get some input on the direction they'd like us to pursue. And mesh would fall somewhere between, you know, between the two, although it has a heavier visual quality to it.
I think cost is ultimately gonna have to play some role because we're not gonna at some point be able to necessarily afford everything. I do think people are also very familiar with the Basel Boardwalk and what that looks like, kind of blends in a lot. So it sounds as though we'll do the hybrid rail and then we'll have a conversation. That will be the proposal and then we'll have a conversation.
Yep.
Okay, next, we're back at Boardwalk Design Consideration 1. Or it's all one.
These guys we talked about real quick.
This is where we are right now.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to give you, I know you'd asked me about life cycle costs and I did mention it's kind of hard to nail some of this down, but yeah, the horizontal wood rail is in the, you know, if it's southern yellow pine, it's in the $10 to $12, you know, a linear foot. Cable's probably about 4 times, you know, in the ballpark of 4 times that. If you go into a tropical hardwood horizontal rail, then that number, you know, goes up. The wire mesh system, it's closer to number 2 in terms of the 45 to 55 a foot for materials. It's probably a little bit closer to, it's something less than that. It might be in the $30, say a foot, something like that for the mesh. I did want to kind of just highlight, I think in 2018, the estimate had about $100, $120 a linear foot for the railing. So it gives you some idea, you know, what the considerations were back then, and we're going to continue to work on what the installed cost of these different systems would be. So I'm just showing you material costs there at the top.
Can I ask you a question? Linear foot, like of railing or linear foot of boardwalk, so you're basically counting 2 railings per linear foot of boardwalk?
Yeah, it would be two sides in that
So
instance.
it's your total, what is the total linear?
It's about 1,400, and then there's the transitions on either end, so it ends up being about 1,600 linear feet all the way around. I think that linear foot spacing is both sides.
I thought it was from
120.
our one,
Yeah.
2018.
Our material cost is just a single side.
See, okay, so that's.
So it's like looking at one side and saying, you know, how much is it to go a foot on one side?
Right, that's
for
what I
materials.
recall, so I just wanted people to be aware that he's
That's
talking
only
about
half
numbers
of
at
what-
one side
Right.
and the original was looking at the,
I think
just for linear
was
foot of the boardwalk.
both sides, right?
Yeah.
So if you, you know, and again, I don't know exactly what the assumptions are, I was gonna go back and I didn't get all the way back to looking at what the assumptions were that went into that one hundred and 20 foot. Yeah, whether it's one or two.
Eric, at what point do you estimate you have an estimate for the cost? At 60%, 70%?
We'll be doing one at 30%. So it's part of what we're doing, but right now things are still moving, you know, moving around enough that we're trying to get sort of, and we're getting there, we're making huge progress for this month, really, the month of November, December with you to nail down the alignments. You can start to measure and count, you know, it's 95 modules. I know that a 15-foot module, we know how many piles we're gonna have, we know how many transitions and so on. So if we're, you know, able to kind of walk away from our meeting with the Conservation Commission with good insight from them, then that'll be setting the framework for the 30% estimate.
How far-
And these initial conversations that we're having about these materials and systems will then get fleshed out and translated into that estimate.
How far are we away from the 30%?
I think probably 6 weeks, you know, sometime the end of January.
Okay.
You know, we're running a little bit behind from where we wanted to be. Well, no, it's important because it's related to the permitting, so we definitely want to try to recover that ground. I think what I'm trying to forecast is if we're sort of making more progress now, it's gonna make us go faster into the 30%, because we've got a lot of stuff that's sort of been moving around, settled down. I hope.
Okay,
And again, the meeting this month will be important. So I had just to put a couple notes, you know, higher lifespan, we talked about this already, the cable rail system, over the functional life of the railing system. You know, while it's more money, it ends up being a more durable system in a lot of cases. There is some value though, people are real familiar with Southern Yellow Pine and those kind of railings, a bass hole, and so, you know, anybody can, you know, fix it and it doesn't require special parts and so on. Aesthetic considerations and marsh shading, we've already talked about that, cables versus wood. And then to Kathy's point of design that incorporates different systems might be the most flexible in terms of price and impacts and things like that. Not just picking one for the entirety of the boardwalk, but you might end up with one or two, and then maybe the benches introduce kind of a third system because of aesthetics and shading and so on.
When you talk to conservation, you'll include the mesh.
We will, they'll see basically, I think I'm gonna share essentially this with a couple more additions relative to the riverfront area, but you know, we'll maybe condense this a little bit, but it'll be kind of this over.
I guess my point is if you want it on the table, whereas they're saying we want mesh Concom over cable rail, do you want to present something that you guys want and then see what they have to say back? Or do you want to leave that open as an option for them?
You're talking about the railings?
Yeah, whether we do the rail or
Or the mesh.
the wire or the mesh.
Right.
We want to prioritize
Right.
our design
All
ideas.
right, so why don't we go around the room and ask? Do you have a preference?
I have to say, if I was gonna do it, I would do all mahogany and I would have the railings mahogany too. I wouldn't do, I love the mesh. I'm nervous about wire. I do think it's breezier, it's
So you
sunnier.
wood all around?
I would do the flat panel all around and make it all mahogany. That would be my preference.
Steve, do you have a preference?
Yeah, I'd like the hybrid that we talked about. Cable and, wood.
But can we use southern yellow pine
Yeah,
for the railings, but obviously the
The
hardwood on the
top,
top?
right, the top would be
yes.
probably this.
Yeah.
The cap.
Would be that,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point.
But
I agree with him.
you like the same idea? Do we have anybody else on, nobody else is online, right? So, yeah, I like the idea of it blending in as much as possible. So that it's almost invisible, which is, you know, we're gonna have good and bad and everything. So I think that the cable wire would be my preference, so that we blend into the environment or just stand out in the environment. I don't know what natural resources would think about any of that or conservation, but my personal preference is to be not perfectly invisible, but, you know, and the way to achieve that is through the cable system.
So you want to present the cable system in the wood and then find out what the Concom thing?
Yeah, because I think the wood is gonna be back in the areas that's not gonna affect you anyway. It's near the, I mean, you can look over towards, you can look at that area.
So you're talking
So
about.
that's
the
where you're
hybrid?
supporting the hybrid.
The
Yeah,
hybrid,
yeah.
the hybrid.
So you're supporting the hybrid?
Yes, the cable red line
Okay.
and wood yellow lines.
I think that's a reasonable proposal to make.
Then they can, right, then they can come back and say, oh, we like it, or we don't like it, we like this one is over the other one, so
Yeah.
that gives them more options too.
It's probably.
So how reasonable is Concom these days? I know when I was on it, we were very reasonable.
They're
No
very, very
No
reasonable.
comment.
Yeah, no comment from me.
Well, we were on just after a very unreasonable commission, so we were kind of proud of ourselves for saying, yeah, that makes sense. Go ahead and do it.
They're trying to protect the resources because that's their charge and that's their job, but I think they understand the benefit of this particular project for the community, so it'll be a
Yeah,
balance,
they're
because
big supporters of
everything.
the project, but yeah, they'll just be trying to.
I'm
figure it out.
sure the Conservation Commission will work just fine with us and we will work out whatever differences we may have and be successful moving forward.
Absolutely.
Which is what I'd like to do now is turn to the next page.
All right, good job.
So these are some interesting numbers that you've presented here.
Right, so, and again, I need to do some more looking at what you did a couple of years ago, but basically the $930 a linear foot was what the cost was estimated, which included the decking, the framing, the anchors, and the railing system. And so if we adjust that forward at some escalation, you know, for several years now, so we in like 2023, we might be constructing it. It's a little over it's a little over $1,000 a foot. And it's just kind of taking the math that you had before that had been developed from the estimate and pushing it forward. We've shortened the length of it a little bit, and like Kathy and I were talking about, like wanting to go back and kind of coordinate this. It used to be about 1,860 feet long. And if we say we're about 1,400 feet of system now, and then we have these transitions down into the forest on either end that I showed you where the boardwalk comes down. You know, we're around 1,600 linear feet at 6 feet wide. If we run those numbers without a contingency, you know, we're at 1.675 for the boardwalk system. And you were talking about the estimates that you had
Right, but I think,
previously in the budgeting.
yeah, I think it was like 1.65, but that was with the contingency. So,
So we're still under 2 million.
Yeah, and I think it's an availability, you know, like I called, last week, we were calling about ePay, and some of the suppliers we're talking to said they didn't want to quote it because they couldn't get it.
Get it.
Mark came in and he said, look, I found some, where was it, Wellfleet? He's like, I found 1,000 square feet of decking in Wellfleet, you know, so it's very inconsistent in terms of what's available. And so we'll have to work on staying flexible, but I did just want to do this budgetary kind of check of, we've shortened it, which is good. Materials escalated, but I think we're okay. We're gonna look more closely at the piles and the benches and the overlooks. But this is kind of a snapshot of where we are with this component.
Next screen. Oh, isn't that pretty?
What is this?
So this is all I wanted to say
Trying to
was,
keep it together.
yeah, no matter what you do, you do the best you can. It's a marine environment. So, you know, make the best decisions as a group that you can. And we can help with that, but there's always, this was floats that broke loose at Bass Hole that damaged not only the railing, which would be easy enough to fix, I think. Although it's seeing the railings on the outside, so you have to kind of get on a ladder or hang over the edge. Yeah, so it's interesting, but it damaged the pilings and the framing and so on.
Now, the decking that we used, are we gonna be able to sell planks and that hard stuff too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the goals. I don't know if it's the entire length or just certain areas, you know, one of those things.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
The-
Whatever we get the most money for.
the dream is to try and do some coordination and maybe try and get people to buy the planks ahead of time and get them engraved as part of the project and put down
Mhm.
once versus now, they kind of put something down and they fill them up and maybe engrave them. I don't know whether there will be that coordinated, but then they'd have to take it off, engrave them and then put it back
And put it
on.
back, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
And if
either
they
that,
get drilled
yeah,
in.
it seems silly.
Do that.
Right, you want to do it, but you might be able to compartmentalize sections,
Right.
you know, in a way to think about it.
Yeah, and then
So-
there's leading up to the overlook areas, or just identify areas of this That's what we're doing.
That's right, I mean, if you can sell benches and you can sell overlooks, there's not that many of those, so those would be
We
maybe.
can sell anything, giving us a chance. Eskimo ice cubes. Okay. We got a lousy
Yeah,
view.
that's
fair.
that's the point of all this boardwalk conversation.
That is just terrible.
That's what you gotta lead up.
They say in real estate, that's the $1 million
Yeah,
view.
yeah.
Or in our case.
Okay, so I wanted to talk a couple more minutes if folks can stay with us
Can
about
we
the
go to
plans.
your?
Yep, we can jump right to it. Yeah, so we just go back one, because I just want to talk about like a little refinement. So this is sort of an earlier concept that we had the day that we walked in the fields. We all walked through the kind of the layout of the parking itself. You can see we had the cul-de-sac off to the side that sort of allowed for, if there was a gated access point, and you might have like people coming in, paying to go to an event. If they didn't want to go or they realized they made a mistake, they could turn around and drive back out. And so Kathy and I sort of been going back and forth on how to maybe integrate this element a little bit more. And thinking about if the park were to be closed at night, maybe it's closed all the way out at 28, or maybe there's a way to have it closed kind of at the cul-de-sac, a turnaround area. We also had a meeting with fire and rescue and just had some feedback from them. They want to be able to navigate a loop around the parking area and ideally around the stage. And so this is an earlier iteration. I'd say this is like November 2nd or 3rd. We did this drawing. And then I'll just go to the next drawing, just kind of an iteration. So what we've done is we've kind of slid the cul-de-sac over, and at this point I'm proposing making it part of the entrance drive,
That's nice.
experience. And so, we haven't quite got all the details worked out, but there could be a gate right there. So at night, sorry, we'll roll that, Kathy, right there. I think you might gate that and you could come in and there's a turnaround possibility. There's access to the side, to the west, which would be for the event space. So there's like a little lag off the cul-de-sac where people going into the event space would go. It's a way to kind of manage and have a gateway to the park itself. Because up at 28, it's pretty tight in terms of access. It's kind of central. And it ends up being a little more efficient. We're not chewing up quite so much land to make the cul-de-sac part of that roadway as you come in. And you can see we've also sort of massaged the alignment a little bit more. We've pulled it away and tried to create a little bit more space for the artist shanties, compared to the earlier version. And then on the perimeter, we've worked out to have a perimeter walk all the way around the parking and behind the stage. And that would be, say, 12 feet, whether it's a combination of some pervious system with reinforced turf, but that a fire truck could navigate.
So you could go around the fire truck.
Yeah.
Did you guys meet with the police department at all, get their input?
We haven't met with police. I think we met with them a lot during the initial, and they were very interested in having the ability to drive and around
Around it,
without having to get out. So I think they would be very happy
Yeah.
with this space.
I just wondering what their thoughts would be on the location of the gate. Would it be closer to 28 or?
Well, you can't get too close to 28 because this is where it gets extra wide and you have a left turn and a right turn. I don't think you want the gate there.
Okay.
I don't know whether we need to move this over a little bit more. Seems like a lot of space there. This is where the future pump station is going, and we need to provide them with the maximum space possible. Because the latest conversations are, the base flood elevation went up, so it needs to be higher. And critical facilities like this, they typically like to be 3 feet above the base flood elevation. So that's gonna get a little tricky with the grades and everything. And there is that isolated wetland, which is a little bit over the 3,000, and it is 3,000 square
We were
feet.
talking about, right, we're
Of
looking-
jurisdiction. It's like less than 3,500, but over.
And they're looking to reduce it too. So.
Oh, are they?
But that's a good one. Can you flip back to the last one before? So you can see we had the road sort of earlier, we were following the road that's there today, and you can see it kind of hugging to the east, and it gave more room for the shared use path on the west. But the next iteration, which is where we are today, if you go back to it, you can see we pulled it back west. I think we still need to do more work at the entrance, though, you're right.
I just think
It needs to be a grand
sometimes I
entrance.
hate it to be too straight. I
Like
think
welcome
we
to
need.
Disney World. Everyone posts in a big gated.
Welcome to whatever we're gonna call this.
That's on my list of
Well, you
things
know-
to discuss.
Are these gonna be one of these trees?
Yeah, and this isn't a full landscape plan, we just wanted to kind of represent, and no, you were talking about Little Park and our little island in New York City, and so it's something we looked at a little bit. what we tried to do is just kind of represent that the trees
Right,
are bolstered by natural vegetation, and the idea is to create these little rooms
Right.
along with the sort of the way the parking's kind of laid out.
you could actually align, if you wanted to, maybe align the gate with the tree stump.
Yeah, and we'll continue to kind of flesh this out. This is a little bit of a work in progress, but I wanted to represent at least that there's landscaping that goes along and tree planting goes along with the reforestation.
My concerns are the shanties and people trying to break into those at night or in the winter time.
That's what I was getting at. That's why I want you
So,
to.
'cause that's gonna be permanent real estate, right, Kathy? That's gonna stay there?
Yes.
We're not gonna move those.
I
So,
think anytime we keep the public away when it's closed, further away from those shanties
Right.
and whatnot, I think it's better off it would be. And I think Kathy, your point, I think you're getting at the opening at 28 there.
This is,
Those are real tight turns as they are coming
As they
in
are.
and now.
Yeah,
I
they're gonna
noticed that
widen.
the other day when we were pulling out, especially they had the cones in that, in the way you can only go one spot, but yeah, any chance you can give with more turning movements, especially as you're coming out. For either taking a left or right turn, I think it's gonna
They
be.
get 3 lanes, and then you just switch it once when the event's coming in, and then switch it the other way going out.
you could come,
we're not gonna have 3 lanes of the road coming all the way in right now.
No.
But just at the
No,
end,
but right here you'd have 3 lanes,
Right.
and it would be either right or left turn, and then when you'd switch it,
I see.
kind of like high traffic onto
The
the.
Cape Cod version of the Southeast Expressway.
Exactly, we'll have our little.
Going to the Patriots game.
You may find
Okay.
the gate comes in a little bit further, depending on where the access road comes in for. At least if people come in and see if the gate's closed, they can turn around and go.
Yeah.
And that keeps them out of here. My question to Jeff is how many other parks do we have that has a gate that gets closed? I know it came up at Sandy Pond, but,
We don't close any gates.
right, and who has a gate?
Well, there's gates at most places, we just don't close them.
Most of them, okay.
So we had to like during COVID when they closed parks and all that kind of stuff, so they're there in case they need to be,
Okay.
but we don't do that on a daily basis anyway.
So if I can have a minute. So the worst thing to do is to have me go out there and walk around, because now my brain is thinking. So here are a couple of questions here. When we walked along here, there was absolutely no view. Can we strip this right down and mitigate to redevelop this whole area so that we would afford somewhat of a view? Because if you all remember, this was, I mean, you were just looking at trees there, which takes away any discussion of views anywhere in here. And my question is that something that you would present to conservation, or is that like crazy thoughts?
Kelly would be the
Like
one.
removing all of the vegetation and putting.
Well, Rich keeps telling us that there's asphalt and stuff down there, so we'd have to mitigate that removal of that anyway. So my thought is, if we're doing that, can we, I don't want to use the word strip this right out, but take stuff out and redevelop it?
Yeah, I would just say,
With new
though,
vegetation?
given my experience with the Yankee Village project I'm working on is that replanting is very expensive. So you might want to try and retain but prune what you have there, because you'll just end up replacing it with other plants that you then have to maintain those. So it might be better to try and save what you have, but just manage it, which again comes down to maintenance. It's like, always comes down to maintenance. But I would suggest, I know we've kind of gone, we've talked about this before. I don't know whether it's possible to have something less formal, but an actual more waterfront trail. And I don't know how they'll feel about it, because it's kind of in the 35-foot no disturb zone, but I think it's worth showing it as an option and just getting there.
Is this like a 3-foot wide would meet the definition?
4-foot wide, I'm thinking,
What
but
material?
I don't
Just
know.
gravel?
Could stabilized aggregate instead of hay, I don't know, I mean, or paved, tri-paved, and see. I feel like, that I think it's important, that's the Riverwalk part of it.
Right.
And I know it's also the no disturb zone, but I don't know,
So within the 35 feet.
it would have to be, wouldn't it? Because,
We just have to mitigate in another way.
Well, typically they say nothing in 35 feet.
I know
yeah, it's the no disturb, but I mean, you could almost be right at 35 foot.
I was just
gonna say, you might
be.
Is that what this little blue dotted line is, the 35?
No, it's down further, but you're also in the 100-foot riverfront area, but
Yes.
it's down here,
Is it this kind
one of those lines. So you could at least,
You're putting same, put a trail east of what we have.
just
now.
so that something can actually see the water.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you're gonna have
This
to
is the
appreciate it'll
35.
it'll be underwater sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah, the 35 foot, I don't know. Does it really
Even if
help
we
you?
just did it like along this, connecting to that.
Oh, interesting. So connect the
Yeah,
two.
even for a section.
Yeah.
Yeah, with these two little spurs come down,
That's a good
up here and
idea.
here.
I certainly think it's worth having a discussion about it, even, they may hate the idea, but I think it is kind of important in terms of the.
So
It's a river walk.
I think the 35-foot doesn't really help you, but if you tried like connecting the two, I'm sorry, I'm pointing at it, but I could just be doing.
These two little spurs.
Right. So you're coming down anyway, people get the nice view, but then they could walk over to here. I think that would provide a lot.
Along the water, because of
Yeah.
So that would be just right in here, you're saying, trying to.
Yeah.
Connect those.
I'm not sure you go that far in. How close do you think we could get?
You
to
follow
the-
the 35.
You think so, or do you think we could get a little closer?
What's the topography like? Because you also don't want it to end up underwater frequently.
It's hard,
Dark.
anywhere down here is, yeah.
It's a very low.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite intact. I mean, the other thing in this area, this is the boulder field, and we sort of stayed, more or less, we're showing this path on the outer edge where we walked that day. But I mean, you could propose taking out boulders and then sort of wind your way through, and make a connection that would then come out at the head of the ramp itself. And I don't know, then you might not have all of this, you might just have this guy coming down and you might not do. So it gives you more room to revegetate, up in this area, if you say you didn't have this path, but you had this kind of system.
I would definitely show that and just get.
I mean, that's the whole idea of what we're
flavor
trying to do is to showcase our river.
I thought that in the riverfront, you could do a trail, but it needed to only be like 3 foot wide and not a, what is that? There's some exception.
Yeah, there was for, I think, a 3 foot wide natural trail, but I don't know that you can do that, can you? Doesn't it need to be?
We'd have to have every 200 feet, we'd have to have a bigger area
Yeah.
to allow passage and
Even
wheelchairs
with
every
4
200.
foot, you have.
Correct, yeah.
So that's one of my issues. My second one, when we were there, I looked at where the proposed kayak launching area is. And are we gonna put a dock to the water, or how are you gonna get across that marsh to be able to, and is that gonna be an issue? So in other words, if we're planning all this and conservation doesn't like our idea of our ramp, what's our plan B here? It's not like a direct to the you gotta go across the marsh to get to the water.
Yeah, we don't really have anything designed for that at the moment, and it is a lot of mouse classes down there.
No, there was an original picture, I think, in the concept. Yeah, it needs to be like a regular dock,
It'd be a
like you
dock,
have, yeah.
That's not it though, is it? That's not.
No, it would be, so sorry, it's kind of.
So is that a separate issue that we're gonna deal with separately at a different time with conservation?
No, I think we were hoping to permit everything.
Together, it would want to be part of.
So they're gonna wanna know more information about that kayak ramp
That's a good
launch
point.
area.
That is true.
Well, we brought up the last time, I know some folks that have boats up here. Have some concerns with being able to come down with their boat either in or out, and where the kayak is going to be launched to come back in, the visibility of the sight lines, that's all. So
The plus of that spot though, there is like a little cove area,
Yeah.
if you will, so that people would typically there. It's not so much that I think most of my boater friends are not so much concerned with launching, they're concerned with the volume. And this area right through here, where there's some site issues, and now the flow of the river has changed even more. So are we creating a navigational hazard by even doing this? And, something we haven't had a lot of conversation about. And I would probably want to have Carl and his natural resources guys weigh in on, not the natural resources, but, the harbor masters. They're up and down that river more than anybody.
It gets narrow in some spots, there's no question,
It does, and
especially at low tide.
so a kayak, it doesn't have to worry about low tide, a boat.
No,
does.
it's about the boat or the kayak.
Right, so he's got, so I think, we should probably include it as part of our process, but understand that we might have to scrap that whole idea if natural resources says no kayak ramp.
Who says that?
Well, I think if natural resources and others tell us it's not
the folks kayak on it now?
yeah,
Yeah.
but we're providing them with with an access point now that they didn't necessarily have.
How do they get, how
Red
do they get the
Jacket or
kayaks?
something?
I think Red Jacket probably rents kayaks to their patrons, and people may probably go in at
But that's
smugglers.
at the mouth of the river.
I mean, not
already,
smugglers,
so
seagulls.
These launching parts
Right,
out.
and they're up down where at the entrance to the river, and they go up in Lewis Pond, I think,
Right,
in that area.
Yeah, and it was a popular spot. I was out the other day, Kearsarge on the other side, where a lot of people from that area go in with kayaks. It's like end of pavement, but they use it like.
it's very popular in the summertime, the kayaking on the Seagull, on the Seagull Beach.
Right.
So,
Well, that would be the other thing, and I don't know how Concom would like this, but if we skip the dock part and just have a ramp that goes into the water.
Yeah, you just,
I mean, you don't need a dock for a kayak,
you'll trigger,
even a path.
the state will not like it because there's.
Because you
so
gotta go
much
across
there.
the marsh.
You're gonna remove
Yeah,
so much to
yeah.
do it. It would, yeah.
So that's another part of our whole issue.
yeah.
Now, which makes me come to my next question. You
Somebody
never should have brought me out here.
chat, is there
No, he's muted,
a,
Kyle.
I just saw something on the
Yeah,
chat.
you're right. Trying to get the.
You, something.
Sure, pal.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was gonna be red for the whole meeting. I gotta head out.
Hi, Kyle. So my next point is this. We're putting sewer in. Isn't there gonna be sewering right down this road?
Sure will.
Ultimately, they will be.
So for the life of me, I can't understand, well, first of all, if this is an issue, then why are we putting this here? Why not put it up here where we just tie into the sewer lines up already? You can have a ticket office instead of a storage office and your bathroom facilities as well, which is services more to the people that come and walk along from here. You could put your bathroom facilities here.
Right, and it frees up very,
And I'm
very
sorry that
valuable
I-
waterfront land.
I wondered the same thing. I mean, that's a long damn way to create a sewer.
It's also very valuable waterfront, sort
Yeah.
of visual parkland.
Yeah,
So if we put the bathroom facilities, I'm sorry, please don't kill me. Up here, less expensive to tap in, provides a utility space where we can have, where we said storage, it could be ticket office, it could be whatever else we may need it for when events take place here.
A lower elevation. I think we were trying to move it further to get where the grade was naturally
But
higher.
either way, we'd have to do something because of the elevation. It is lower, but it's still low here too.
Right, but I think you can blend, if you're only filling 2.5 feet, you could blend it in a little bit easier than if you're going 4.5, 5 feet in that area. What you're talking about.
Yeah, the terrain there is lower. So you got this point, so there's more filling to kind of get it up, but that's, we can discuss that. It just needs a bigger footprint, around it. I think in this location, it's central to the boardwalk, it's central to the event space, it's central to the riverfront park, it's central to the ramp, which I thought was some of the reason for moving it. So we had the elevation, we had the but I hear what you're saying in terms of the distance to Cortland, if that's where the tie-in is to be for sewer.
Is it going all the way down?
No, it's.
Well, I got a question
up
about
to
Portland.
it's
This
two-
shows
it's
like
half the
the road's
distance
extending. You're not
from
extending the
Boardwalk
road.
and across the site.
No, Colin's, that's just the,
Right, and if you moved it up there, ultimately the hookup is a lot closer than bringing it all the way across the site.
and now we have a multi-use,
Well, we don't have to, but
But you free up beautiful land down here for something.
and we don't have an issue of what the hell's going on back there.
If you use a vehicle for you to get in.
Well, that's what I was getting at. Yeah, might-
Because those bathrooms are not gonna, I went around and looked the other day, just because I was curious about the bathrooms. It's not a bathroom facility that's opened after Labor Day.
That's right.
So they're all locked up from end of
That's
September
right.
through till Memorial Day, even sometimes after Memorial Day. So the majority of the time, they're not gonna be in use
Mhm.
unless you can have them in use while these things are being used in those off seasons. But again, are we building this just to be able to accommodate kayaks, or is it more a multi-purpose? That one item is gonna be expensive,
Mhm.
that one item. So I think we need to get it right before we decide where to put it.
Well,
Security is a big thing.
And to the extent that a lot of the costs associated with that have to do with the environmental issues of having a wastewater treatment all those are mitigated if you move them up to a Cortland, because ultimately it would be tapped into the public system. So a lot of those costs, we may not have to incur.
Right.
It may be some sort of a temporary fix, and then ultimately they're gone, because we.
Well, the cost to get you to tap into the septic is the sewer is either from here to there.
Oh, that's what I said,
or from here to there.
It's half of what it would be.
And I'm having to wait 4 weeks for PVC fencing already, so never mind supply chain.
Is Cortland sued now?
No.
No, when they
it
do the
will
town
be,
sewer.
it will be.
It's part of phase
It's
one.
not in the first phase though.
It's not in first phase?
That's in second phase, because if it's, yeah, it's
So
in
you have to
second
get all the way
phase.
back to 28 or the pump station in the first phase.
It's still worth considering. I think Jim's suggestion is worth considering long term. Remember, we're making a big investment here.
I always had the issue with security back, like Jim said, it's kind of hidden back there.
Right, it's isolated in the winter time, it will be a magnet
It's
for
gonna,
kids.
it's graffiti, like, I'm all for helping out the driving site.
And then that frees up, we can do something really nifty down there in terms of parkland or trail or something.
Yeah, you can put playground there.
There'll be some kind of trailhead, right?
Right.
We have a playscape to consider, you know.
Just trying to
something.
mound it here.
Maybe.
I mean, just
Uh,
mound
that's
it,
great.
I know,
It's-
it's
it's-
very
it's
long.
big,
Concessions,
it's
yeah.
big, right?
Trees
So-
that people can
But-
just irrigate naturally during the
We
winter.
should talk about in more detail on paper, you know, kind of sketch it and see.
So what do
We
you
do have a
want?
couple cross sections of it so that we can talk about kind of the height and how that works.
I think the key is getting the application to the Concom, which needs to be done by Thursday, correct? So I think we can talk about what the concept we're proposing here, and are we still going with the hybrid of some fill and then some dry, or some wet, dry flood proofing, sorry. Because then we can say, well, this is the worst case for them, because it's
Right.
closest to the
It's in
riverfront. So we can always say that this is what we're talking about. We're also talking about maybe moving it some other places even further away from your resource area. But this is what we're thinking of doing with the fill dry flood-proof concept to get some input from them. That way we don't have to change anything before Thursday or try and worry about that, but we can talk about potential.
Yeah, say if we have to have it here, here's what we.
Right, right.
Is the canoe kayak paddleboard, is that a rental
It's gonna be.
entity?
Plan was the rental, right?
There's both, there's
So there's
rental
a
and also.
Vendor storage racks. for
Storage.
residents,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just like the ones when you go over the Bass River Bridge. and the
yeah,
Dennis.
I've been over to look at those, yeah.
Okay,
So we're gonna have electricity, no matter what, even if it's not a building, we'll have electricity
Not necessarily.
from the vendor.
What does a vendor need electricity for?
Credit card.
No, they get, everything's on their phones these days. Nobody needs electricity. Unless he's running the lights or something, you don't need.
We need
We'll
Wi-Fi
have power-
in
You're
here,
gonna have
so.
power down there.
Probably should have, no.
You're gonna have.
But it could be
electric-
just a
yeah,
trailhead, just a trailhead and maybe the playscape.
Mhm.
It is a pretty area. There are some filtered views out in the south and west.
Yeah.
I apologize for bringing this up at the last minute, but it's been something that's on my mind.
It's not really the last minute. I think, 2 weeks from now would be the last, so I think it's important to talk about it,
To me, it just, I mean, part of what we're gonna, if there's no events going on and the weather's lousy, people may not be using the kayak place, but we may still have people visiting these,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and think about it. What is this distance from here to there?
a long way of.
So from here to there, and you've got a little kid who says, "Mommy, that's a long walk. I got a feeling they're gonna find it well here, that they haven't quite got there yet." So if the majority of the time that the facilities are gonna be used might be focused up towards this area, and the kayak ramp used on sunny days, maybe it doesn't make sense to put our bathrooms down.
Have you done some grading on the road? Because I know you were talking about needing to build it up anyway because of the porous pavement.
Right. We have, and this area ends up getting brought up the grade wise.
Oh, it's 4.
Yeah, so this would be go to 7
Okay.
to get some of the clearances we're talking about. So I think what happens is, it's hard to imagine, but this footprint that it takes, and we can look at the sections, there's a couple sections here, to kind of get this up, this footprint, it takes more land to get up to that height. And the ramps get a little bit longer and things like that.
Well, we only need one handicap accessible roof and we could use stairs.
Right, you can introduce, but that comes with cost too, yeah.
Right, but it's kind of a no man's land of space anyway, so if you've got to go up.
Right, it ends up being quite visible, like I get it as sort of a gateway feature, you see it and you recognize that you just come in, and better for security, and certainly utility distance is less. I think functionally, is it okay for it to be closer to the artist shanties if the artist shanties don't happen or aren't run the way you're seeing them? It ends up being kind of at the head of the park, which I guess is where it was originally, right? And is it
It's
too,
where
is
the
it too,
artist
ro-
shanties are.
yeah, is it too remote? Is it too remote from the boardwalk and too remote from the event space? If it's up at this sort of northern
I
end?
don't think so. I don't think it's that far away.
It's kind of 6 of one, half of those on the other,
Right.
maybe the way.
It's pretty small.
I mean, if it's gonna be more of a admin ticket storage area, we might not wanna spoil the other aesthetic part of the park by having a.
It's more wild as you get south,
Yeah, I
yes,
mean,
for
you
sure.
want-
Functionality
Yeah.
is really, I think, the key is what's the most functional, practical.
Right.
And to me, my brain is just running dollars. We only got so big a pie and we're taking 2 million of it to build a boardwalk,
The runoff from the road, where's that all going?
For
So-
pavement.
So right now, I think it's going in. Yeah, we think that the road itself might be a hard impervious and it's gonna go into the parking and. So part of what we're having to do is this is sort of higher, Freeman, my pen broke, I guess, but I turned blue. This area is higher, sort of just instead of going down and then back up, we're gonna kind of fill through here and even this out.
Yep.
So in order to do this, we just have to keep sort of filling in this area to get to that desired elevation. But I think that this is the most sort of impactful for that discussion. And, before it was it was really right in here, right? So.
Yeah.
And maybe we can work on something the next day or so to see how it could fit.
I think if you're going 7 already, it might not look as bad. When we had moved it down here, I think we were looking at existing grades, not realizing, I don't think we had finished the borings and the test pits that had been done,
Right.
indicating that we needed to fill it up. There's gonna be more money for, obviously, the fill. But like if you can take it from here and kind of just level it out, you just become,
Yeah, and we're definitely talking about taking this edge down and pushing it back. some more
whether
to
we
do
need to
that.
screen it. That's 3.
Yeah, I think that's why intuitively, when we were talking about it earlier, we said, it's close to the south. But, we can look at, whether this dips or whether this stays level, how we marry that together. But I think now's the time to talk about those ideas and try to get it.
And again, the only other issue is how Concom is gonna look at the kayak. What do we need to do there? Do we need to build a dock?
Yeah, I mean, it was always gonna be like any private person who needed to have a boat, you have to get over the salt marsh. You can't just fill it or allow people to walk.
Well, you either walk down a dock or you build a ramp. Your
Yeah.
choices are getting in the water. To build a ramp means you're gonna have to go over the marsh. Or the dock is gonna be elevated to get your height restrictions, and then you're gonna have to probably go to a floater to get. So you're gonna have to walk out, go down a ramp that floats up and down onto a floating ramp.
Yeah, I think
That was the
the
plan.
picture, yes. I'm sorry, I'm not a voter.
The only thing I would tell you, caution you about with that is now you've got to carry a kayak down a boardwalk onto a floating dock to get into it.
Yeah.
Not
And then
easy.
from Waterway's point of view, how far are they gonna allow that dock to protrude into the river, which is probably not very.
Mhm.
Yeah, it would meet the regulations. They don't need a variance because it needs to, it's
So it's
supposed
gonna
to be
become an
like
issue.
100 feet from navigation channel, so.
I don't know, I just want
So
to,
it's
I mean,
100
the
feet,
kayak
right up
concept
to
is
100.
great, but
I've
I'm
seen it,
just
it's
not sure how it's gonna work.
That's what I'm trying to figure out in my head. After seeing it the other day, I didn't realize.
Whatever the street on the other side of the river is and launch there. I mean, why do we need 2?
Well, there's no other.
There's no place on the other side. is there?
Private.
It's all private.
So private.
It's all private.
But having walked it the other day when we looked at it, I realized that that's, you've got to deal with conservation for that, just like you do the boardwalk, and now we're talking about putting a dock in,
Yeah, that's.
or in the middle of the night, having Robert Howe pour a bunch of asphalt over there that we knew not how it came from.
I know.
And now we have
the
that
dock
beautiful ramp,
application,
but-
We're looking at shellfish implications.
Exactly.
That's
Well, part of our
more
issue
complicated
is,
even than what we're looking at here.
And keep in mind, the biggest reason why we're talking about this and not a marina is because of that marsh.
Yeah,
So now we're saying, well, let's put our kayak, I love the idea of the kayak, route, but
Is
at
there
what
any other
cost are we
place
gonna be able to do
along-
this?
Is there any other place along that riverwalk that we could put the kayak ramp?
It's the ideal spot if you're
It
going
is
to
the
build
ideal
one, because there's that little cove.
Right.
Unfortunately, this
Yeah,
picture doesn't go, but
yeah.
It does,
right
yeah,
here, you can see just a little corner, of it. There's a
There's a
little
little
Oh,
hole there.
perfect for kayaking.
So it's a
especially-
perfect spot.
Novice
The
kayak.
question is, how do you develop?
No, you're right, there's a little hole there.
But even though that's the perfect spot, is there, if we can't get it there because of the narrowness, is there any
Yeah,
other
there you go.
spot that we could put it?
See how you got this little
Right,
inlet here?
perfect, perfect.
And this is where we're,
We were planning it, right?
let's
Or-
see.
Yes.
Yeah, it's right
You
there.
can see on the old plan there. Yeah, there you go.
But again, this is all marsh,
Mhm.
just like that
Mhm,
here, so
mhm.
how are we gonna break through that? Is gonna be something that conservation's gonna dictate, there you go.
So
This
there's
is a separate whole issue.
Extreme approach Jacques Cousteau used on the Blue Hole and just dynamite that section. Make an opening where it flows in.
Is there any other place?
You'll be all right
along
with that, right, Kelly?
we could put the-
No, I don't think.
We met with Carl and we talked to him about
That's not
that.
just
about
about
his-
conservation,
how
you know,
far, you know,
The,
Okay.
It's very narrow there, too, further north, so I think there's good
That's
space
it.
here.
That's
yeah.
where they also, I think it's open because I think they do sometimes go in there with boats or something.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
they have done in the past,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that it's a
That's the
fairly
ideal
thin
spot.
area there.
Yeah, they've just been driving their boats up on the beach there, on the marsh.
Obviously not recently, because the marsh grass is.
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah, but that was my,
Can't do it.
that was my observation, since I went down, I went, uh-oh, this is all marsh grass, you can't just start.
Yeah, I
Launching.
think, yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
doable, it's just gonna have to meet the regulations to the greatest extent it can in terms of, you know, it's gonna be elevated, and then you have to figure out the best design for kayaks rather than.
Yeah, there are floating docks. that-
Muscles to relocate, you know.
There are floating docks that have inclined surfaces that are set up for the kayak to be, so you're not launching off of an elevated float, so there are transitional pieces, which I think is that kind of T shape or that hammerhead. If you have to get out, and there are permanent impacts, over the marsh, in through that area.
So is that
at 4 feet
information
wide.
that we're gonna need for your meeting with them this time?
Yeah, we'll probably talk about it in more detail. I mean, you're highlighting that we've been focused on other areas, but this is one that it would be a mistake not to touch on this. And I think go back to look at what we had proposed originally. I think there was correspondence about this to the Conservation Commission back a couple of years, right? There was a memorandum that may have touched on the approach for that. So we'll include it, for Thursday.
I know.
The other thing is Carl needs to put his stockade fences back up around the, up well, I saw them today, they were looking like
Falling
they're falling
down.
down.
Yeah.
Okay, those are my 3 bad news things that I've been eating at me. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, I don't think that we've got necessarily any bad news. I think we gotta do a little scrambling to take some of these ideas, right? What do folks think about, just to go back one, what do you think about the cul-de-sac sort of being integrated into the drive itself?
I kind of like it.
I like it.
All right, so we're okay with
Yeah,
this.
that's good.
We'll show that, keep it going. bit more
Yeah, we can put
space.
a sign here that says whatever the no name.
Yeah, I think it gives you a chance to, maybe there's a dedication opportunity for the island or. who
Yeah,
knows?
no, I think that's good.
Okay, so we'll stick with this. All right, we can go ahead and keep going. And I think the building, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things with the restroom itself. So this little red line, we kind of cross section through this, just to give you an idea of kind of how this is going to be working, which is the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not the next slide. These are the elevated, which I think we've moved away from the elevated guys. And we're looking at just building an earthen mound, right? So we're gonna raise this up. We're gonna have the tight tank in that. And we're gonna flood proof the bottom portion of the building approach.
Now, would you have to do that same thing if you were to move the facilities to the,
West.
Yes.
build it up the same way?
North.
You'd put a tight tank in for that, and then when the septic would, you'd tie it in later.
Yeah, the difference might be, the pump, if you move it closer, the pump you put in the future could be smaller, perhaps the pumping shorter
Can
distance.
gravity, I mean, how deep, isn't that gonna be deep to that,
You could gravity be very expensive.
to the pump station?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a little drawing, we brought a board that shows this, but the idea, it sounds like a lot of fill, but I think if it's kind of tariffed out and transitioned, and, landscaped,
Mhm.
you can get the building up into those elevational ranges through filling. And it would be the same in either location. I think that's what one of these. Yeah, that gives you another idea of kind of what that looks like through there. And so it's really important that we have budget to landscape around the building. And in the case of the current plan, that area is within the degraded sort of riverfront area. So we would be getting, where there's a building there or not, we'd be getting some restorative value, revegetation of the area. Just south of the cul-de-sac.
And what is that red line that you're showing across?
This is just kind of a cut, like, so where if we slice this is what we're looking at. So this is-
Oh, okay, I see.
Imagine like,
Yeah, yeah.
kind of like an orange and look at it.
Okay, so that's no delineation of what.
No, it's just kind of
Got it.
graphically
Yep.
what it is. We can go on to the next one. So with the building itself, we've been looking at a couple different floor plans. I think we did this as a concept back in October. Since then, we looked at Smallwood Beach, which was this version. I think folks like this, other than the plumbing chase was wide, it's 4'8" through the center. And so the thought was we can kind of shrink up the width a little bit and maybe bring that down to like 4 feet, 3'6" for the clearance in the middle. This had a janitor's closet, had a janitor's closet in the front, is the same on this, and you can see in the kind of office and storage in the back. The one thing I didn't think was fantastic was sort of approaching it. You have these two doors and you kind of have one dead door, which is the custodians. Maybe the building would be better served with the office on the front, which I think is the next one. So we put an office on the front, we put the restroom doors on the sides. So there's something to kind of talk about with that. It's men on one side, women. And then mechanical space, storage space on the back. The building does start to get a little long with this scenario, so, you know, those are the things that maybe we have to look at in more detail. But we're kind of getting closer to the Smallwood Beach model, which I think you like that building, because you like the layout.
Yeah.
It also has an overhang over the doors too, so it's kind of protected and presents some kind of sort of.
What if you
sense of entrance.
what if you spun these this way and put the two doors here? Would you still have the same space? Is that maybe that's a rectangle.
We could take a look, at that. It ends up being maybe a little more of a square, you know.
Yeah, more.
We haven't fully tested out sort of the footprint scenarios, but we're just trying to get a handle on, you know, layout and something you've got in other places that you like that works for you.
Yep.
And so that's the building, and then I think we have some, just on the stop logs, we kind of pursued this approach. It looks like these might be around $5,000 a door to have these systems, and this assumes a concrete block building, or at least the base is concrete block, and that's, the angles are attached, and then the logs are put in for the flood protection. Then our windows would be higher.
If you move this, what Jim was talking about, you need this,
Yes, everywhere on the site, no matter where you go, unfortunately, it would have to be flood protection. And Mark confirmed that this is an acceptable approach.
I think if this is the way we're going, though, I think then, I mean, Mark and I have done a lot of conversations with DCR, like out in the state, but I think your designers would need to take it, this is where you guys want to go and
And test
confirm,
it, yeah.
and test it and make sure that everything is fine, but it seemed like a viable option based on the information.
And there should be money available for that in the new infrastructure bill, isn't that, they have a huge climate,
Resiliency.
environmental,
Yeah, so I think it would be.
flood control.
So, and this was some of the stuff that we touched on today, and you'd asked me about lifespan and just overall what the cost and people have to keep in mind.
Yeah, me too.
You know, it's a tough time right now with availability of materials. In some cases, things that we've been using for years just aren't available, and they aren't available under the normal timelines. And we may have to consider new or different materials as we go through the process. And will the product be available when the project's put out to bid? We'll make sure we're picking materials and we're flexible when we get ready to bid the project. There's sort of ongoing labor challenges, both locally and nationally. Sometimes the trucks can't get loaded to get shipped, or sometimes they can't get unloaded. They're sitting in port somewhere with all the materials. So we're still working through this, and this is one of the things that affects when you're asking me questions about pricing. You know, we can get some handle on pricing, but right now it's really, really difficult to nail it down, especially the installation price. But then the material prices keep moving around too. So like steel's was really busy about a year ago this time, and went up 3 times in the month of December last year or this year. So it looks like it's going to continue that way. Particularly things like the boardwalk itself, the railing systems, the building, the restroom
The building
structure.
itself is gonna be.
We talked about PVC, electrical wiring. I mean, all of these things, not that they can't be secured, they can be, but sometimes it just takes longer. And then you expect it, and sometimes the price is different than what you expected.
Yeah, some of the materials for the training facility we just built went up ridiculously this last spring from a year ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then I mentioned this because I'm not sure what the bandwidth is of the appetite, but we worked in some communities where the communities purchased some of the material or equipment themselves. And if you have the space to store it, maybe that's an option.
We did that with all the windows for the building. We
Yeah.
bought them like a year in advance to just start them, and it was a good thing we did.
So things like site lighting might be something where you would, there's some risk there, right? If the town takes that on, if you purchase something because you gotta go through that process yourself, but then you control it, you give it to the contractor and you say install the same thing with the windows. If the windows weren't perfect, it was on you because they weren't. So there's pluses and minuses to this, but in some cases, upfront procurement might help you mitigate some of the costs. And it looks like I lost a bullet there. I don't know what I was gonna say. Uncertain times, the same, more of the same, yeah, more of the
For
same.
us to come up with something.
So anyway, but I did want to kind of just tack this on because I think it is kind of the undercurrent of construction these days, is just understanding a lot of variables and trying to plan for flexibility, going forward.
Well, I appreciate that part because, like we said, our pie is only so big. Kind of been very generous, but I'm not sure how much.
Well, I don't know, has the town actually committed any money to this? I thought it was all very.
CPA is $3.7 million.
Right, but that's CPA, that's not. town
That's not
budget
grant
money.
money, that's
No, it's not town budget money,
No,
but it's
that's my
town money.
point.
Town tax, yeah.
Different
Not
pot.
out of the budget,
Right,
but out of-
right, but the town, right, you need to. You're right, start beating the drum a little for the town to start
We
committing.
gotta vote on minutes, so. I'm sorry.
Just one other thing.
Can we vote on minutes?
Please.
I'm sorry.
Have we talked about security cameras? Does any of, I'm just throwing it out, we don't need to spend time on this for the next meeting, but
Yeah, we
am I the only one concerned about
Nope.
security? I mean, you get back to some of these locations off-site around the back. And,
right,
you're kind of deep into the woods there, and, I'm just looking at potentially thinking about some kids that are.
We'll probably have security cameras in it. I mean, we have, I don't want to use this, how do you use this? What is the term I want to use? In places that are frequented by people that doing things that they shouldn't be doing.
Which we have now.
We have,
Yeah,
Well,
in
cameras.
conservation
We
areas
can
that
talk about
have
it.
been identified.
If we can talk about it at a future meeting, just,
Yep, yep.
just put on, I just want to put it out there.
Yep.
With people.
we'll put it on there.
I want to do the minutes so that I can put the packets up, so I can put them on the website so people can see all the great stuff that we're doing.
Yeah.
Um,
I have a motion to accept the minutes of. Oh, wait a minute.
November 1st.
Thank you.
So moved.
Any discussion? So I have a first, a second, and a third. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None? Okay, so good, good.
And 15.
Thank you
11.
too, in particular, for all the work you're doing on this.
11:15.
11:15
tonight, appreciate
Are you moving?
Yes, I have a motion to move 11:15.
Second?
Who-
He's moving a second.
Steve, Steve, and then Susan?
Yes.
Second.
And we're all in favor.
All right, excellent, thank you.
We'll come again. We get it back.
Are you adjourned?
Later.
No, we're not adjourning. We got a couple of quick
Because we
other.
don't have quorum anymore.
Well, we need to set.
Yep.
A date for another meeting
Okay, so you're meeting with, the meeting with conservation.
on the 16th.
16, okay, so,
Yeah, it'd be after
Soon
that,
after
beginning, sometime next year.
but then we run into Christmas.
Yeah, we'll do it January, want to go January?
Yes, in
Yes.
January sometime. I think it's gonna be more of a function of what happens at the Concom
Right.
meeting, and then how quickly you can, coalesce that into something for the committee.
Well, there are two other things I put on the agenda.
Yeah.
Naming of this silly property.
Why do we have to know that?
Can we
You wanna
get a
call it the
little
drive-in
further
site
along
forever?
with the design? Can we just get a little further along with the design so that?
Well, yeah, you said it's just gonna be a follow-up to that, so there wasn't gonna be anything else on your agenda.
I'm just saying, I think that we're gonna need to make some decisions and just to keep him moving forward with the design.
All right, rather than discuss the the agenda. Let's pick a date and you and I can talk about the agenda at another time.
The 17th of January is Martin Luther King Day. There's the Monday, the 10th. Mondays continue to be good. I don't know, New Year.
I think Mondays seem to work for everyone. Does that work for you?
As a placeholder.
I think Monday the tenth, because that's 3 weeks from, after you meet. That's almost a month after you meet with
The
conservation.
10th works for me.
Holidays in between.
No, but
Yes, and I'm on vacation.
Doing a
Until the
whole-
5th.
See how that
January
goes.
5th.
Yeah.
Would the 10th work for
Yeah.
you? Right, the
The
10th
10th?
works, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
4:30?
Does that work for you?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm thinking if conservation comes up with something profound, we don't want to let it
They will.
next meeting.
No, they will, because we're gonna have a good conversation.
Yeah,
So I want you to pencil it in, but I think we might,
Profound.
we might have to revisit it and say,
Okay.
we're not ready, but this book it, we've got it in the calendar. See-
Okay,
see
so
how-
let's plan on the 10th at 4:30.
10th at 4:30, yep.
And the 16th conservation is at what time?
5 p.m. And we do have a pretty full agenda, unfortunately.
When we last talked, it was like looking, so,
We've
okay.
got 5 new applications.
Are we first on the agenda?
I haven't done it yet, but
We're rather long-winded still, so maybe we'll last, I don't know. It doesn't matter, whatever gives us the best platform, I guess, depending on the other folks we have. maybe if they-
So,
The
We're
10th.
in Scottsdale, Arizona.
yeah. I haven't looked at the applications yet to see whether any of them are gonna take a long time.
I'm sorry.
So I haven't looked at the applications yet to see. I'll be working on the agenda tomorrow.
And from us, what kind of material? We're treating this as sort of a work session.
Yeah, so I went through and I can run through with you and Mark the slide, the information that I thought would be most useful.
Awesome.
Yeah,
And
we
then, so it's just something like this for
Okay.
them for Thursday,
Okay.
and then, some slides that you can click through the
Okay,
presentation.
and I'll have Laura with me too as well, our wetland scientist, so she'll join, it's just if we're gonna get more technical or certain aspects.
and you're gonna bring up moving the bathrooms at that meeting?
I will, I think I'll just talk about, this is what came up and, I think
What do you
if
think?
anything, it sort of pulls away, we'll try to put something on paper and we can circulate it via email.
That's good.
I think it's just notifying them that it may change, but it's gonna move further away from your resource areas and.
Less detrimental.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly,
You can accept that motion at town meeting because it's not,
the discussion of the path that kind of winds along the edge is much more, I think, more important in terms of trying to get that idea on the ground.
right.
We kind of stayed away from that and kind of retracting, and I think there are reasons to go to that edge for the public benefit, but we want to make sure we're having that conversation.
And you're limiting it to a reasonable area, and you're not trying to make it a huge wide swath or a really long place.
And it will get us in there to remediate some of the stuff that's already in there.
Well, we know that it was previously paved, a lot of it, and there's invasive shrub material in there, like autumn olive, and there's some honeysuckle and things like that, so there may be some things that we can take out and improve habitat with replanting in those areas, so we'll look at that and try to make, try to make a presentation, include those components of the invasives that we've noticed out there.
Okay, great planting list if you want.
Always, yeah, we're always
I
looking.
got
We're always
Actually, I can't wait to get it in the ground. It's going, it's really good.
It would make an enormous difference in how the place looks, especially up with the main building. The
Yes.
landscaping is a huge plus for this project.
And start to work on those little rooms, right now, it's just kind of this expanse and creating spaces
And
people
create
feel more
little,
comfortable being in.
interest,
We're getting
pockets of
there.
interest.
Yeah,
right.
we're gonna have a base bid and additive alternatives, and we may not get every one of those pods fully filled out, but
Right.
initially, but we'll work on, chip away on it over time.
Well, we're getting there. Good job, everybody.
I think it's gonna be 2 times. I think that money, the infrastructure money will be coming down.
Oh,
the pipe.
tons of it's stuff right.
That's tricky.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything that's gonna control water,
Yeah,
we could probably get federal funds.
yeah.
Virtually anything.
Meeting's
Because
over.
if it's going to control, fraud.
All right, do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Well, one's in favor too, we left.
He was in favor 5 minutes ago. Thank you,
All right,
thank you.
Good to see you Wednesday.
Oh, you're
Thank you.
making a new seal? Is that-
Yeah.
Oh, that is the seal.
I'm gonna start.